Chapter 2685. Damn it! Liang Mingfu shouted and was about to cast another spell. But at this time, the dozens of black lines had flown to the big hand, and dozens of black spots appeared on the big hand like spots. Seal! Liang Mingfu dared not hesitate. His Dharma power surged, and the big hand emitted a faint light again, driving all the spirit-swallowing bugs away from the big hand. When Liang Mingfu was about to control the big hand to catch the spirit-swallowing bugs, they opened their sharp teeth again and started to chew the light of the Yuan Ying's hand. You're courting death. Liang Mingfu snorted and slowly grabbed the spirit-swallowing bugs with his big hand again. Uncle Yang, watch out! Li Zongbao's voice was very loud. Liang Mingfu was in danger and hurriedly released his divine thought. Sure enough, just behind him, dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs scattered and flew towards him. At this time, they were less than 3 feet away from him. How can these spirit-swallowing bugs be so cunning? Liang Mingfu was shocked. He moved quickly and the Yuan Ying's hand smashed towards the spirit-swallowing bugs again. Buzz! The spirit-swallowing bugs were almost unable to move under the restriction of the Yuan Ying's hand. Suddenly, the big hand made a deafening sound. Damn it! Liang Mingfu heard it and his face changed greatly. Before he could do anything, boom! With another loud sound, the Yuan Ying's hand suddenly collapsed in the air and turned into a broken talisman again, falling slowly. The spirit-swallowing bugs that had swallowed the Yuan Ying's hand swarmed towards Liang Mingfu like a swarm of bees. Run! Liang Mingfu only had one thought in his mind, and his body suddenly swayed. Pa! Just as Liang Mingfu flew several meters away, a spirit-swallowing bug strangely rushed towards him from the side. Liang Mingfu waved his hand, and 2 more spirit-swallowing bugs appeared on his left side. Liang Mingfu's heart sank. When he just raised his other hand. Buzz! As if thousands of bees were dancing around his ears, Liang Mingfu was very anxious. He scanned with his divine thought and his face turned pale. He saw that the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs had already landed on his back and were devouring his protective golden light. Oh no! Without hesitation, Liang Mingfu made a prompt decision to cast an incantation before the protective golden light was extinguished. Boo! With a loud bang, the space within a radius of hundreds of feet shook violently. Countless airwaves rushed in all directions from here, and the dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs were also pushed more than 1,000 feet away. That was not all. Within 100 zhang of Liang Mingfu, there were several golden core cultivators and quite a few foundation establishment disciples. The golden core cultivators were still able to escape in a panic, but the foundation establishment disciples were miserable. Although they tried their best to escape, they were still unable to escape the impact of the golden core explosion. Most of them died. The pitiful thing was that instead of dying in the mouth of the spirit-swallowing bugs, they were dragged to the grave by their own teachers. For a moment, the area within 1,000 feet of where Liang Mingfu had exploded was completely empty. How terrifying! Xiao Mao exclaimed in shock when he saw how powerful Liang Mingfu's self-destruction was. Li Zongbao, Fairy Xianxia, and Xiao Mao were originally quite a distance away from Liang Mingfu. After Liang Mingfu flew in the opposite direction, they were at the edge of the 1,000 feet radius. When Liang Mingfu self-destructed, they hurriedly dodged and did not suffer much damage. That's amazing! Unlike Xiao Mao, Fairy Xianxia saw that after Liang Mingfu's self-destruction, only half of the spirit-swallowing bugs fell to the air. The other half flapped their wings again and rushed toward the nearby golden core cultivators. Master! Li Zongbao was shocked again. Heng Zhao was very close to Liang Mingfu, so he was the first to bear the brunt of the self-destruction. When he hurriedly dodged, more spirit-swallowing bugs were pushed to his side by the airwaves. Unfortunately, this wasn't the most important thing. Right at this moment, countless sword cries resounded from beneath the cultivators, and tens of thousands of enormous flying swords charged straight out from the ground. Sword light flickered, and sword chi crisscrossed. It was precisely the swordsmen that Lu Ruochang had hidden within the spirit-devouring grand formation that had attacked at the same time. Previously, only the spirit-swallowing bugs were wreaking havoc in the soul-devouring formation. Under the control of Fan Kuei-Yuan's pagoda, their main targets were the cultivators at the golden core stage. The foundation establishment and chi-refining disciples were only disturbed by the so-called gold-swallowing bugs and earth-swallowing bugs. Of course, many disciples were killed by the real spirit-swallowing bugs, and their corpses were everywhere. Now, the sword formation showed its sharp teeth again. Its target was the Foundation establishment disciples who had lost their fighting spirit. Li Zongbao wanted to help his master, but the huge sword was condensed by many sword lights. Obviously, it was the joint attack of a group of sword cultivators. How could Li Zongbao be distracted? He hurriedly clapped his hands and habitually took out the Immortal piercing whip. However, the Immortal piercing whip had been destroyed by the spirit-swallowing bugs. How could it be useful? Li Zongbao sighed and hurriedly looked for other magic weapons. Fortunately, Xiao Mao and Fairy Xianxia were beside him. The two of them temporarily protected Li Zongbao. The huge sword of the soul-devouring formation was born. As the sword chi surged, hundreds of spirit-swallowing bugs were attracted to it. However, in the sky, the fluctuations of the pagoda suddenly intensified. The spirit-swallowing bugs only hesitated for a moment before they rushed towards the golden core stage cultivators again. Now, there were less than 160,000 Dao sect cultivators left. They had long been reduced to mere chickens and pottery dogs. There was no way they could form an army. During the first two battles, they could still form simple formations to fight against the giant sword. Now, they could only rely on their instincts to flee in all directions. Many disciples had even died at the hands of other cultivators. For a moment, screams rang out everywhere. In the flashing sword lights, it was like purgatory. Not only that, under the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs, more and more golden core stage cultivators used their final killing moves. One by one, protective talismans were used. Although these nascent soul stage cultivators could kill some of the spirit-swallowing bugs, once they used their talismans, they attracted more spirit-swallowing bugs. It was tantamount to drinking poison to quench thirst. In just a short time, more than 10 golden core stage cultivators died. Among them, there were several golden core stage elders in the conference hall. Ko Xiangling of the Yongyi sect, Zhu Junwei of the Cool Breeze Valley, Yuan Yiguang of the Bluely sect, and Qing Ziyi of the Mo Sang Mountain were all cultivators in the early stage of golden core stage. They had been injured outside the sword tomb. Although they had recuperated for a while, how could they protect themselves under the attack of the spirit-swallowing bugs? One by one, the spirit-swallowing bugs rushed into their bodies and swallowed their golden cores. Hua Ping from the blazing fire mountain was proficient in the art of controlling fire. Wisps of flame flew to the left and right from time to time, luring the spirit-swallowing bugs to fly to the left and right. At the same time, she also wandered on the edge of the cliff of death. Huang Feng from the exotic beast sect was also strange. He had a strange beast that looked like a green snake coiled around his finger. From time to time, he would make a sharp hissing sound from his mouth, which made the besieging spirit-swallowing bugs a little afraid of him. However, these cultivators in the early stage of golden core stage were just on the verge of death. They would die if they didn't do anything. Hung Ming and other cultivators in the middle stage of golden core stage were still trying their best to hold on. When they heard the sound of self-explosion from time to time, they felt bitter in their hearts. They knew that the Taoism sect cultivators were really defeated in this battle. However, they still had a little hope in their hearts. They wanted to find a chance to escape from this spirit-swallowing formation. Woo, like a gust of cold wind, a chill appeared on Hang Ming's face. Oh! Hang Ming was slightly stunned. He was a cultivator in the golden core stage. Usually, he was immune to cold and heat. How could he feel the cold wind at will? Not to mention that he was fighting hard against the spirit-swallowing bugs. Hang Ming couldn't help looking around. When he looked around, he felt a chill in his heart. As far as the eye could see, there was a flash of sword light. Outside the sword light, there was a thick fog. Within the fog, wisps of dark green were faintly discernible. At the same time, there were strange cries of ghosts and howls of wolves coming from within the fog. Obviously, the fog had been there for a long time, but Hang Ming didn't notice it. All the disciples in the Foundation establishment stage and the Qi refining stage who had escaped earlier were forced back by the fog. Although these disciples activated their flying talismans and flying skills, it was obvious that their Dharma power had been exhausted. From time to time, some disciples were infected by the fog. However, those who were sprayed by the fog all fell from the sky without making a sound and no longer moved. Hang Ming really sucked in a breath of cold air. His heart was cold and an unparalleled sense of despair rose in his heart. LV Ruocheng. had really put in a lot of effort in this square sword formation. He had used all his methods. The yin-yang sword formation killed cultivators in the middle stage of the foundation establishment stage and below. The five-element sword formation killed cultivators in the golden core stage and above, and the spirit-swallowing bugs killed cultivators in the golden core stage and above. As for the remaining cultivators, they were killed by this mysterious fog. From the moment the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators fell into the square sword formation, their fates had already been decided by the swordsmen of the Han Kingdom. LV Ruochang would not let a single cultivator fly out of this sword formation, no matter if it was Qi refining, foundation establishment or golden core. There are dozens of sects in the Dao sect. Why are there no senior brothers in the later stage of the golden core stage participating in this battle? At this moment, Hang Ming suddenly thought of LV Ruochang's question. Could it be that the Dao sect is bound to lose in this battle of Dao cultivators? Do the teachers of each sect already know? Or is there another reason? Hung Ming naturally did not have an answer to this question. Looking at the fog flashing with green light, Hung Ming had already lost the courage to fight. He also did not have the strength to resist the attacks of dozens of spirit-swallowing bugs. Even if a senior brother in the later stage of the golden core stage came, he would not have a second chance of survival. At this moment, in the thick fog, a green shadow gradually became clear. It was the palace guarding bug, which had already become 10 feet long. This palace guarding bug's body was strangely distorted and the green light was flickering rapidly. On the palace guarding bug's back, Night Rain, who was dressed in black, gradually appeared. Chapter 2686. Soul Armament. Hung Feng's body trembled uncontrollably as he stared at the beetle. Ever since he took charge of the council hall, he had read up on many of the previous battles in the council hall. He had even read up on some of the information and records from Sky Patrol City. Thus, he had some understanding of the situation in the Huan Kingdom. Now that he saw the green glow of the beetle, which was as agile as a spirit beast, how could he not know that it was a soul armament? Lu Ruochang has gone mad. In order to win this war, he actually lured soul cultivators into the Huan Kingdom. Hung Ji turned pale with fright. But when he saw Yi Yu's true face, he was a bit surprised. This soul warrior seems to be different from what is recorded in the ancient records. Master. Li Zongbao's voice sounded distant. Hung Feng was startled again. When he looked again, a spirit-devouring bug had already climbed onto his protective golden light. Forget it. Everything is about to end. Hung Ju raised his head and looked over. Li Zongbao, Fairy Xianxia and the rest were trying their best to resist the sword light. Seeing his proud disciple like this, Hung Ju felt gratified. Perhaps this kind of life is what Zongbao should have. But I won't be able to see it. Seeing a spirit-devouring bug bite through Hang Feng's protective golden light without any resistance, Li Zongbao's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. At this critical moment, when all the Dao sect cultivators were about to be wiped out, an indescribable pressure surged from the west of the sword formation like a rising tide. This pressure was very weak in the eyes of Hang Ming and the rest, but it was simple, tenacious, and peculiar. This pressure was like a rising tide, instantly enveloping the great spirit-devouring formation and even surging toward the east. Following which, a huge sealing force descended from the sky, completely enveloping the entire four-direction sword array. This sealing force was so strong that all the cultivators, swordsmen, and even the spirit-devouring bugs stopped in their tracks. Someone is condensing their core. When Hang Jiu felt this pressure, he immediately knew that it was the pressure of a golden core cultivator. Just like Yu Tong, when the sealing force appeared, Hung Jiu also understood that it was the celestial phenomenon of a cultivator's breakthrough. What a pity! Hang Feng felt a trace of regret. This late-stage foundation establishment disciple is not condensing his core at the right time. If it was a few days earlier, he would have succeeded. Now that he's condensing his core here, there are spirit-devouring bugs, swordsmen, and even soul warriors. How could he succeed? However, the power of imprisonment was not what Heng Zhao had imagined. It grew stronger and stronger, and everyone was trapped in it. Especially those spirit-swallowing bugs. They were tightly confined and could not move at all. This. Like Yu Tong, Hung Feng's heart was in turmoil. He was a middle-stage Golden Core disciple of the Utopia faction, so he was very clear about the details of a late-stage Golden Core cultivator's pregnancy. He knew better than Yu Tong about the signs of a late-stage Golden Core cultivator's pregnancy. This sealing force could only be produced by a late-stage Foundation Establishment cultivator's pregnancy. It was absolutely impossible for a late-stage Foundation Establishment cultivator to condense his core. Which senior brother is actually in the Sword Catacomb? Hung Feng was almost stunned. No cultivator, no matter if it was the state of Shi, the state of Meng, or the state of Lian, with any common sense, would conceive a baby in the Sword Catacomb. However, Hung Feng was only stunned for a moment. Then, a thought of escaping from death appeared in his mind. His previously dead vitality sprouted like a bud. Hung Feng knew that in the early years, the Taoism sect cultivators who were trapped in the sword formation relied on several late-stage Golden Core cultivators to conceive a baby. From there, they won a chance of survival and defeated the swordsmen who were already confident of victory. Now, wasn't this the Taoism sect cultivators repeating the same trick? Wasn't this the best opportunity for them to kill the spirit-swallowing bugs and escape? Almost without thinking, Hung Feng reached out his hand and took out the nascent soul talisman with difficulty from his storage bag. Then, he activated the Dharma power in his body with difficulty. Buzz! With a flash of brilliance, the nascent soul hand slowly expanded. In this confinement that was comparable to that of a pregnant baby, the nascent soul hand could still be activated. Since Hung Feng had such a thought, De Sun, Xianxia Song, and the others naturally had the same idea. All the Golden Core cultivators in the conference hall who had talismans activated their nascent soul hands. Although there were hundreds or even thousands of spirit-swallowing bugs, they were different from the Golden Core cultivators in this confinement phenomenon. They trembled very much, as if they were extremely afraid. The fluctuations of the pagoda in the sky were also disturbed by this confinement force. The spirit-swallowing bugs were no longer under control. They froze in midair, and the nascent soul hands grabbed them and crushed them to death. Damn it! What? Why is it a pregnant baby again? Outside the spirit-swallowing formation, LV Ruochang and the others were also affected by this confinement force. Their expressions changed greatly. LV Ruochang almost stomped his feet in midair and said hatefully, which Golden Core cultivator is pregnant? Among the hundreds of thousands of cultivators in the Taoist sect, there is no disciple in the later stage of Golden Core, right? Seeing that the confinement force was getting stronger, LV Ruochang was so angry that his whole body trembled. Boom! A huge explosion came from the spirit-swallowing formation in the distance. A burst of yellow brilliance shot up into the sky and shook the confinement force. Fan Ming Yuan, Fan Jianyu. LV Ruochang saw this and his expression changed again. Inside the spirit-devouring formation, yellow light soared into the sky, and the area within a radius of several thousand feet was hit by a powerful wave of air. The restrictive force inside the formation was shattered by the explosion of the pagoda that Fan Kuei Yuan had turned into. The remaining hundreds of spirit-devouring bugs once again had blood-red light in their eyes, and they madly charged toward the nascent soul hands of Hung Feng and the others. This time, the spirit-swallowing bugs were even more powerful. In a moment, the nascent soul hands were devoured. The hope that the Taoist sect cultivators had just had was snuffed out again. Fan Jianyu. LV Ruochang looked up at the sky and said sorrowfully, "The warriors of the sword region will never forget your contributions." Then, he urged the sword light under his feet to fly slowly in the confinement force. He said coldly, "Even if there is a Golden Core cultivator in the later stage of Golden Core, so what? Not to mention this spirit-swallowing formation, even my final killing move is not something that a pregnant Tian Zhao can defeat." However, before LV Ruochang could fly more than 10 feet, strong hurricanes were set off in the space enveloped by the confinement force. The center of these hurricanes was a small virtual point. As these hurricanes grew stronger, the virtual point gradually revealed a shiny silver-white light spot. Once this light spot appeared, it immediately condensed and grew larger. In a moment, it grew to the size of a thumb, then a fist, and finally a dipper. This dipper was surrounded by a huge whirlpool. The golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the whirlpool was constantly gathering, forming many pearls. The golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the entire square sword formation was swept away and turned into these crystals. For a moment, The radiance of the magic tools and magic treasures on the battlefield dimmed, and the sword light gradually disappeared. Some cultivators who had exhausted their magic power couldn't even stand steadily in the air, and actually fell from the sky. Of course, this situation only stagnated for a moment. Gusts of wind swept up in the formation again. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth and sword chi in other parts of the sword tomb surged toward the formation again. This. LV Ruochang was stunned. Hung Teng was even more stunned. But while Hung Teng was stunned, he was also pleasantly surprised. This was because the spirit-swallowing bugs attacking the nascent soul hands were obviously attracted by the vast amount of golden spiritual chi of heaven and earth. They did not care about the hands of the nascent soul and the golden core cultivators. Thousands of spirit-swallowing bugs, whether real or fake, rushed toward the huge crystal. The spirit-swallowing formation was no longer effective. This does not seem to be a pregnant senior brother at the peak of the later stage of golden core. A pregnant senior brother shouldn't have crystals. Hung Ting almost stretched out a hand from his throat. Only pure spirit tide can form a nascent soul, right? But, if it is not a pregnant senior brother, how can there be such a huge crystal? Perhaps this senior brother's nascent soul is different from that of ordinary cultivators. This could only be Hang Ting's guess. Quick! After LV Ruochang recovered from his shock, he did not have time to care about the abnormality of the pregnant senior brother. He cried out to the group of third-grade illusory swordsmen, "Let's hurry and find the location of this senior brother's nascent soul before he is pregnant. From the looks of it, he is not far away. Maybe we can take the opportunity to kill him." But what about the golden core cultivators in the spirit-swallowing formation? Ruoling was a little weak, but she still asked, "It is very difficult to kill a nascent soul. Why don't we take the opportunity to kill the rest of the Dao sect disciples?" LV Ruochang said confidently, "I have a soul-killing formation outside the spirit-swallowing formation, even if there is a pregnant senior brother." As he spoke, a rumbling sound of thunder rang out from the sky above the sword catacomb. Within 100 miles of the sky, the rolling dark clouds surged rapidly, and faintly discernible golden threads danced in the dark clouds. A vast killing intent, through the power of imprisonment, filled the space between heaven and earth. Pooh! Alvarochang sensed the killing intent of this heavenly thunder. How could he not know that this was the nemesis of spirit warriors? A mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth, and he was practically dispirited in midair. Junior sister LV. Ruoling was shocked and hurriedly flew forward to support LV Ruochang. LV Ruochang's eyes were lifeless, like a dead fish. He stared straight at the sky and muttered, "In the sword catacomb where lightning does not occur, when will there be heavenly thunder? This cultivator who is pregnant in the sword catacomb, who is this expert?" Alas, since LV Hushing was born, could it be that this is what she said? That I was too clever in my calculations, and in the end, I ruined Qingqing's life? LV Ruochang was sad. Could it be that I can only fail at the last minute? This is predestined. Chapter 2687. Just as LV Ruochang expected, outside the spirit-devouring formation, the rolling fog was still moving forward slowly and steadily, although it was affected by the confinement force. Although the palace-guarding bug and Yi Yu could not fly in the air, they had already landed on the ground, but they were still crawling forward step by step. However, sooner or later, they would meet the Taoist sect cultivators, and these cultivators would be killed by Yi Yu's soul-destroying formation. Hung Zhao and the others were ready for the final battle. However, when the heavenly thunder broke through the confinement formation, Yi Yu's face changed greatly. Others did not know, but he saw clearly through the soul-destroying formation. All the vengeful souls were struggling painfully in the heavenly thunder, and many of them had turned into white smoke and disappeared. More powerful vengeful souls, attracted by the soul-destroying formation, were fleeing in panic. Yi Yu looked at the sky, and he was also confused. But just as he was confused, the heavenly thunder in the sky became more intense. The golden light was shining, and it slowly gathered in a place in the west. Oh no! In the golden light, the heavenly thunder became more and more powerful. Yi Yu's soul-destroying formation trembled in fear, and the green light around it gradually dimmed. Yi Yu complained secretly and hurriedly recited the soul incantation, and the soul-destroying formation shrank rapidly. When the soul-destroying formation was restored, Yi Yu looked at the 40,000 vengeful souls of the Sword Mountain and the 4 sword schools reluctantly. He wanted to activate the soul-destroying formation to collect them, but these vengeful souls were trapped in a quagmire under the heavenly thunder. No matter how Yi Yu activated the soul-destroying formation, he could not take any vengeful souls away from the heavenly thunder. Without the vengeful souls, how could Yi Yu dare to face the golden core cultivators? Yi Yu's figure slowly disappeared as he prepared to leave. However, Yi Yu's figure flickered several times, but he just couldn't disappear. Under the might of the heavenly lightning, his soul cultivation movement technique was also affected. Hung Zhao and the others were killing the spirit-devouring bugs while observing Yi Yu. They saw Yi Yu collect the soul-destroying formation, and his figure flickered several times, and then he turned around and left. How could they not know that he had given up the soul-destroying formation? Overjoyed, he hurriedly circulated his true essence to fight against the binding force while killing the swordsmen. Relying on the strength of a single person to break Lu Ruocheng's plan of several years, relying on the strength of a single person to save hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators from certain death. Other than Xiao Hua, who was preparing to condense his core in the Brahma Gold Palace, in this Dawn Rain continent. Who else could it be? However, Xiao Hua's situation was not as simple as Heng Zhao and LV Ruocheng thought. Xiao Hua originally wanted to rely on his advanced celestial phenomenon restriction to kill Yu Tong, but just as he was about to make a move, a tearing pain suddenly appeared in his lower dantian, as if his entire dantian was about to be torn apart. When his divine sense sank into his lower dantian, he was unconsciously scared out of his wits. He saw a light purple thing slowly rotating between his 2 lightning cores. A huge suction force came from this light purple thing. This suction force rushed into his qi refining and foundation establishment meridians. This situation was originally recorded in Zhen Qing's experience of condensing one's core. Other than the 2 lightning cores, everything else was roughly the same. However, what caused Xiao Hua to turn pale with fright was the suction force generated by the core condensation. This suction force was divided into 2, each containing the power of the heavenly Tao. The power of the heavenly Tao in these 2 suction forces was different according to the Tao of Yin and Yang. One was Yang, the other was Yin. They were separately sucked into his 2 meridians. If it was an ordinary cultivator who condensed their core, the Yin and Yang suction forces would be completely balanced. Because of the different Yin and Yang attributes, the solidified true essence absorbed would produce a fusion of Yin and Yang, which would allow the true essence to condense into a golden core in the dantian. But at this moment, the suction force in Xiao Hua's 2 meridians was completely different. The suction force in the qi refining meridians was more than 40% greater than the suction force in the foundation establishment meridians. This enormous suction force twisted Xiao Hua's lower dantian. This kind of heart-tearing and lung-splitting pain was more severe than any kind of needle pricking. Moreover, this suction force had already penetrated deep into his meridians. The unbalanced power twisted all the meridians in Xiao Hua's body. Seeing this situation, Xiao Hua understood. If it was an ordinary core condensation, then he would have taken the dry separation pill. The dry separation pill could accelerate the solidification of the true essence flowing within the meridians. This solidified true essence would be sent into the light purple area by the suction force, and the golden core that countless foundation establishment cultivators yearn for day and night would condense there. However, would Xiao Hua dare to take the dry separation pill now? His 2 suction forces were completely unbalanced. Not to mention whether or not it would affect the 2 meridians, even the amount of true essence used to condense the golden core would be different because of the difference in the Yin and Yang suction forces. And with different amounts of Yin and Yang true essence, could it condense into a complete golden core? Xiao Hua could almost think of the answer with his heel. It was absolutely impossible. The only result of doing this was that the Yang true essence would be greater than the Yin true essence, resulting in the asymmetry of the golden core. This golden core could only collapse, and he could only die. There was not a moment when Xiao Hua didn't want to cultivate to the golden core realm, but now, he had truly condensed his golden core, yet he was incomparably regretful. This young master. Why did I have to cultivate to the 18th layer of qi refining that day? Why didn't this young master think of the difference between the Yin and Yang suction forces? Xiao Hua was incomparably remorseful. Martial Uncle Zhen Qing. You Why didn't you write an extra sentence in the jade slip? However, all of Xiao Hua's remorse, all of his complaints, how could they change reality? On the Dawn Rain continent, no one had ever cultivated a cultivation method after the 12th layer of qi refining. This kind of conformist matter was bound to have a cause and effect. If it wasn't for the fact that the meridians refined by the 12th layer of qi refining were exactly the same as the meridians refined by the 3rd layer foundation establishment, how could this qi refining cultivation method only have the 12th layer, and not the 11th or the 13th layer? Perhaps many years ago, there were people who cultivated to the 11th or 13th layer. Perhaps they also failed or even died when condensing their golden core at this time. Perhaps these lessons were passed down by word of mouth many years ago, or even recorded in a taboo. However, after so many years, cultivators had already forgotten about it. Everyone thought that the 12th layer of qi refining was a matter of course, but who would really think about why it was precisely the 12th layer? Even if Xiao Hua asked Master Wuxian to answer, Wuxian might not necessarily be able to say anything. Instead, he would probably fly into a rage and berate Xiao Hua, forcing Xiao Hua to cultivate peacefully. However, Xiao Hua had the memories of cultivating to the 18th layer of qi refining. Yet he wouldn't ask Wuxian for advice. Furthermore, Zhen Qing's jade slip also didn't have any records of the balance between yin and yang. Most importantly, in order to find his own origin, Xiao Hua chose to cultivate to the 18th layer of qi refining without hesitation. All of these were enough to lead to today's tragedy. Of course, before these tragedies, Xiao Hua once again tasted the countless benefits of cultivating to the 18th layer of qi refining. His true essence was a lot more vigorous than ordinary cultivators, and he had the advantage in fights. His divine sense was also far stronger than others, and his cultivation speed was also far faster than others. Unfortunately, everything had a price. Although many times, this price was their life, there would always be people who would risk everything to do it. Others laugh at me for being too crazy, and I laugh at them for not being able to see through it. Xiao Hua was truly at his wit's end. He smiled bitterly in his heart. Originally, I thought others were idiots, and I had already seen through it. But unfortunately, I was the idiot, and others had already seen through it. This 13th layer of qi refining cultivation method was placed in the Imperial Thunder sect, yet no one cultivated it. I don't believe that with so many capable people, not a single one of them could see through it. Even if they didn't know about the meridians in the entire body, how could they not know if a foundation establishment master explained it to them? Why didn't they cultivate it? Wasn't it because of the balance between yin and yang? Wasn't it because the qi refining cultivation method on Xiaoyu continent only had the 12th layer? Perhaps there were also people who tried, but all of them fell. But, in the end, I'm different from them. I seem to remember that this qi refining cultivation method originally had the 18th layer. In order to find my origin, I could only... it seems. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua's heart suddenly moved, and a bright light flashed in his mind. Since the current suction force is different, the root of the difference lies in the two meridians. Since this young master knows about the meridians in the entire body, why can't this young master create a meridian that is similar to the meridians in qi refining after the foundation establishment meridians? Xiao Hua immediately thought of the meridians in the entire body that he saw when he was dual cultivating with Fairy Xianxia. But Xiao Hua hesitated again. I don't have a method to refine the meridians in the future. That's right. Different meridians, different cultivation stages, require different refining methods. Xiaoyu continent doesn't have a so-called universal cultivation method, and even the water attribute and fire attribute physiques cultivation methods are different. Although Xiao Hua knew the location of the meridians, without the corresponding refining method, it was also useless. It seemed that he had reached the end of his rope again. Xiao Hua was somewhat impatient, but within his dantian, the two lightning cores were still revolving, emitting hissing lightning. That light purple thing slightly swayed, and the suction force within was still increasing. This is really going to kill me. Xiao Hua really wanted to stop condensing his core right now. If it was someone else, perhaps they would really be able to stop. On Xiaoyu continent, cultivators who were stuck at this stage were as numerous as carps crossing the river. One more Xiao Hua didn't count as anything. But what was worse was that the two lightning cores were constantly revolving, emitting lightning. Xiao Hua was simply powerless to stop it, and the suction force that was tearing his dantian only became stronger, not stronger. Xiaohua himself didn't know whether or not his dantian would be torn apart by this suction force in the end. Xiaohua's primordial spirit, which was comprehending the primordial spirit sword controlling technique, didn't have time to continue comprehending, and hurriedly flipped through the many cultivation methods that he had comprehended before. Earth attribute, water attribute, fire attribute, qi refining, foundation establishment, gold core. Xiaohua had collected a lot of cultivation methods, and the meridians involved were also not few. But unfortunately, there wasn't a foundation establishment cultivation method that required meridians. Suddenly, a crazy idea emerged in his mind. Create a cultivation method. Chapter 2688. A self-created cultivation technique? Thinking of this outrageous idea, Xiaohua bitterly smiled. Every cultivation method was a summary of their own cultivation process by a senior with an extremely profound cultivation base, exploring a path that no one had ever set foot on before from the height they stood on. And these seniors were at least nascent soul cultivators, right? So much so that the cultivation techniques created by the senior experts, after their creation, had gone through many years of analysis and modification by many capable people before they finally took shape and could be practiced by low-level cultivators. Xiaohua's current cultivation base was only at the late foundation establishment stage, yet he still wanted to create a cultivation technique for foundation establishment cultivators. This was simply an impossible matter. Normally, even if Xiaohua was beaten to death, he still wouldn't think in this direction. Even if he was really asked to do so, he definitely wouldn't do it. Perhaps he would only smile lightly and say, "Let's leave this matter to those with outstanding talent to worry about. It's better for us commoners to tuck our tails between our legs." But at this moment, the situation was so dangerous. At the juncture of life and death, how could there be any elegance? Perhaps only in this kind of critical moment could a person's potential be stimulated, allowing them to see divine abilities that they normally couldn't see. Seeing the suction force tearing at his dantian and distorting it, Xiaohua stepped into a desperate situation. The idea of creating a cultivation technique gave him a glimmer of hope. With only a slight hesitation, Xiaohua stepped into a domain that he had never thought of before. I've previously practiced the dragon transformation art, so I'm extremely familiar with the meridians in my body. In terms of the path of discovering the meridians, it's 100 times better than those masters who don't know the meridians. In addition, the key at this time is to balance the yin and yang suction forces. It's not necessary to cultivate from the early foundation establishment stage to the late foundation establishment stage. I only need to open up my meridians. It's not necessary to refine my true essence. Also, I have many cultivation techniques here. Even if I don't know how to create a cultivation technique, it's not necessarily impossible to succeed as long as I follow along. Furthermore, I usually practice the dragonization art as well. The tenacity of my meridians is incomparable to that of others. When I'm developing and refining my meridians, I can correct any abnormalities as soon as I notice them. There might not be any mistakes. Lastly, there is an extremely large amount of metal attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the sword tomb, and there is also an extremely abundant amount of sword qi. Furthermore, I obtained the secret art of transforming sword qi into true yuan from the Yu family, so I don't have to worry about absorbing the spiritual energy of the heavens and earth. The more Xiaohua thought about it, the more he felt that there was a glimmer of hope in front of him. Immediately, his heart was filled with incomparable faith. In this world, there will always be a first cultivation technique. This first cultivation technique might not necessarily be the work of a nascent soul or spirit-severing stage senior. Since there was someone who could make such an earth-shattering move and create a cultivation world in this world. If that's the case, why can't this young master step on the shoulders of the predecessors and create a simple foundation-building technique? With such determination, and in this extremely dangerous place, Xiaohua actually made an astonishing move. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes with difficulty, enduring the heart-wrenching pain. The cultivation techniques that he had seen before flashed through his mind, and he tried to find some incantations to refine his meridians. At the same time, the dragonization art also stopped under the control of the other Yuan spirit. That Yuan spirit also gathered at the new meridians and carefully examined the effects of the incantations. At the same time, Xiaohua controlled Si Yinding to open a gap in the Buddhist gold formation, allowing the metal attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth and sword chi of the sword tomb to pour in. The heavenly infusion technique in his body was activated again, and the metal attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth and sword chi quickly poured into his body, rushing into the meridians that Xiao Hua was preparing to open. As he tried the incantations one by one, strands of true chi were refined, and strands of true essence were produced with great difficulty. Needless to say, almost all of the existing incantations were useless. Xiao Hua slowly tried to modify individual details according to the meridian's perception. Once the meridians were smooth, the refinement of true chi would immediately proceed. If the details were not satisfied, Xiao Hua would have no choice but to figure out a new incantation according to the previous incantations, and then use this incantation to refine the spiritual energy. Time passed slowly like this. In this irreversible time, Xiao Hua was racing against time, trying to create a new cultivation technique before the gravitational imbalance collapsed, and to balance the power. Fortunately, Xiao Hua's Yuan spirit was very strong, and in this short period of time, he was able to pay attention to many details. When the first strand of true chi was produced in the new meridians, Xiao Hua's heart had already calmed down, and the originally extremely unbearable tearing also gradually weakened. Looking at the Buddhist gold formation where Xiao Hua was, a huge vortex was slowly forming. Xiao Hua was evolving a cultivation technique from the early stage of foundation establishment to the late stage of foundation establishment, and the amount of spiritual energy required was enormous. Although there were large crystals in the range of several hundred li, those crystals were the celestial phenomenon of core condensation, and would not be affected by Xiao Hua's cultivation at this time. Gotcha. In the high sky, fine golden heavenly lightning was suspended, from time to time rolling and brewing, but it did not fall for a long time. In the sword tomb where 10,000 lightning bolts were not born, the rich gold chi that had accumulated for many years was slowly being defeated by the might of the heavenly lightning. Countless vengeful spirits were fleeing in the midst of the heavenly lightning, trying their best to escape from the shroud of the heavenly lightning. However, this heavenly lightning had an endless suction force, and although it was extremely far away from the vengeful spirits, those vengeful spirits were unable to escape. This was the gold chi that had been defeated by the heavenly lightning, and a huge amount of sword chi was slowly flowing in the sword tomb. The vortex above the Buddhist gold formation was so large that a lot of spirit chi and sword chi inevitably fell into it, and as more and more spirit chi and sword chi flowed in, it formed a torrent that entered the sea. How could Xiao Hua know that he was already changing the current situation of the sword tomb? He was only immersed in the tranquility of creating a cultivation technique. The huge amount of spirit chi and sword chi was absorbed into his body by the immortal body-filling technique. The spirit chi flowed into his meridians, and the sword chi was once again transformed into spirit chi by the falling gold mountain secret technique. Following the spirit chi, it flowed into his meridians, and within his meridians, this spirit chi was just in time for Xiao Hua to try out the newly created cultivation technique chant. It was absolutely impossible to practice the entire cultivation technique before the suction force tore his dantian and body apart. But under Xiao Hua's attempts, new meridians were gradually being opened, and the yin-yang suction force also had a place to go. The huge difference between the yin and yang suction forces was gradually being changed. Moreover, this change was extremely slow in the beginning, but later on, it became faster and faster. This was the same as when Xiao Hua was creating a cultivation technique. In the beginning, it was admittedly unfamiliar and at a loss. But with failure and success, he gradually grasped the knack of it, and the speed at which the cultivation technique chant was being produced became faster and faster. After an unknown amount of time, perhaps several hours, perhaps several days, when Xiao Hua finally practiced the last chant, Xiao Hua calmly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with incomparable confidence and incomparable calmness. He slightly sensed it and let out a sigh of relief, secretly thinking that he was lucky. In fact, when Xiao Hua was creating the cultivation technique, he had neglected another crucial point, and that was that the 12th layer of qi refining was equivalent to the 3rd layer of foundation establishment. Xiao Hua's 18th layer of qi refining was only 6 layers more than the 12th layer of qi refining. If he were to create the meridians of the 3rd layer of foundation establishment, then, wouldn't the yin-yang suction force be greater than the yin-yang suction force? Wouldn't that cause another imbalance? This problem was also something that Xiao Hua realized in the middle of creating the cultivation technique. But at that time, how could Xiao Hua retreat? He could only brace himself and force his way through. Perhaps it was the effect of the Phoenix Jade Talisman, Or perhaps Xiao Hua only focused on opening his meridians and did not thoroughly refine his true essence. This time, a balance was formed. Naturally, in this balance, there was no longer any pain, only a trace of fetters, like a fishbone in his throat. After all, Xiao Hua's newly opened meridians were not completely opened. Xiao Hua's lips curled into a smile as he muttered to himself, "This cultivation technique should be my Fortune Gate's first foundation establishment cultivation technique. It's a rare cultivation technique for the metal element physique." However, after the joy, Xiao Hua was bewildered again. In fact, it had only been a few days since the beginning of the creation of the cultivation method. In such a short period of time, how could it be so smooth? Even if he was really talented and could create his own cultivation technique, how could opening meridians and refining his true essence be something that could be done in a short period of time? Xiao Hua was prepared to risk his life to delay the core condensation process for several weeks or even several months. To be able to succeed in a few days was definitely not what he had imagined. Could it be? My meridians don't need to be expanded? Only need to be able to refine my true essence? Could it be that when I cultivate the dragon transformation art, Xiao Hua couldn't help but have some doubts? Forget it, this is a good thing, and now is not the time to investigate. I'll think about it when I don't need to open my meridians. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua activated his newly created cultivation technique. Streams of majestic true essence condensed into true essence and rushed towards the final barrier. Boo! A faint muffled sound rang out, as if a wall had been pushed down. The two attractive forces in Xiao Hua's dantian suddenly became incomparably balanced, and the true essence in Xiao Hua's meridians became still at the same time. The two attractive forces of yin and yang blended together like water and milk, and all the large crystals in the cage involuntarily trembled. Xiao Hua understood that this was the best time to condense the core as mentioned in the Zhenqing Jade slip. Without thinking, he slapped his hand and took out a dozen dry separation pills from the space and was about to put them into his mouth. But at this time, a vigorous sword qi rushed into his body, and the already stopped heaven and man body bestowment technique was once again attacked by a large amount of metal element heaven and earth spiritual energy. Xiao Hua's body involuntarily trembled. Chapter 2689. Oh! Ah! Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. His divine sense swept over, and he was immediately frightened by the huge vortex above his head. Without thinking, he hurriedly urged the Seeing Cauldron to close the gap in the Brahma Gold Array. However, the almost endless sword qi and spiritual energy followed the previous trajectory and directly poured in. Xiao Hua simply couldn't close the Brahma Gold Array under the impact of the sword qi that was stronger than a waterfall. He couldn't even stop the sword qi from rushing into his body. The endless stream of sword qi and metal qi was like a torrential river and sea. Xiao Hua's back was covered in cold sweat. It was really one wave after another. Each wave was higher than the one before. If Xiao Hua was careless, he would fall in this wave. Withdraw, Xiao Hua shook his hand and took out the yin-yang sword gourd that was previously stored in the space. He urged the sword gourd to move. The endless metal qi, sword qi, and sword qi continuously rushed into the sword gourd. However, in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the sword gourd emitted a green and red brilliance. Xiao Hua understood that the yin-yang sword gourd couldn't absorb any more, so he hurriedly put the sword gourd back into the space. Forget it, this young master. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. He was once again forced into a corner, once again tied to a pirate ship. First drink poison to quench thirst. Then we'll talk. For a moment, Xiao Hua could only activate the dragon transformation art, agitating all the meridians in his body. The two sets of yin and yang meridians heart sutras were displayed. The heavenly infusion technique drew in an endless stream of heaven and earth spirit energy, refining the true energy in his meridians and forming true essence. Rumble! As Xiao Hua urged the dragon transformation art, a burst of muffled thunder sounded. It seemed to be in Xiao Hua's ears, but it also seemed to be in Xiao Hua's body. The power of heavenly thunder was born from the surroundings, slowly imprisoning Xiao Hua. Ah! Lightning tribulation again. Xiao Hua felt the familiar feeling of lightning tribulation when he first entered the Foundation establishment realm. He couldn't help but be shocked and deeply bitterly smile. Forget it. It's like this anyway. Then let's do it together. Thinking of this, Xiaohua simply ignored the lightning tribulation. He only focused on the sword qi that was poured in. As for the sword qi that was poured in, Xiaohua didn't dare to use a secret technique to convert it into true qi. However, he had long since comprehended and modified the Falling Gold Mountain secret technique, which allowed him to directly transform the sword qi into sword origin. Since there was a steady stream of sword essence being produced, Xiaohua very naturally flipped through the sword techniques for sword cultivation. He opened his mouth and spat out 2 flying swords, cheerfully flying around Xiaohua. Starting from the most basic part, he started cultivating bit by bit. The strands of sword essence condensed by Xiaohua rushed out of the sword technique in his hand, as if chasing after the 2 flying swords. They formed circle after circle of mysterious sword essence around Xiaohua's body. Inside the sword tomb, with Xiaohua's Buddhist gold great array as the center, the sword qi and spirit qi formed a hurricane. This hurricane was like a tidal wave crashing against the shore, surging towards Xiaohua. As time passed, this hurricane grew larger and larger, and the area it affected also increased. At the edge of the sword catacomb, as if it had sensed the phenomenon of Xiaohua condensing his core, all of the purple jasmine flowers bloomed. Among the bright purple petals, a blood-colored fruit was revealed. This blood-colored fruit was so bright that it reflected the rising sun outside the dense dark clouds, emitting a faint light. Outside the sword tomb, the scattered cultivators of the Dao sect and the sword cultivators of the Huan kingdom, as well as the disciples of the cultivation clans who had come to the vicinity of the sword tomb in search of opportunities, were all shocked by the sudden appearance of this strange phenomenon. All of them had shock on their faces as they looked at the faintly visible lightning flashing above the sword tomb. They knew that something important must have happened for there to be a strange phenomenon in the sword tomb that was devoid of lightning. Perhaps, it's time for the cultivation war to come to an end. Everyone had this thought, but the Dao sect cultivators who were trapped in the 4-direction sword formation did not think so. Even the sword region swordsmen who set up the formation did not think so. LV Ruochang and the other 3rd-grade illusory swordsmen had already arrived near the spirit-devouring Great Array. They had already reorganized the Huan country swordsmen into a new Great Array. However, because the spirit qi of heaven and earth in the sword tomb was confined by the phenomenon of Xiaohua condensing his golden core, although the spirit qi of heaven and earth outside the range of the golden core was constantly flowing into the sword formation, this spirit qi of heaven and earth was once again sucked in by the suction vortex formed by Xiaohua earlier. Therefore, there was not much spirit qi in the sword formation for the swordsmen and cultivators to use. LV Ruochang and the other sword cultivators wanted to attack, but they were powerless. The swordsmen could not use their flying swords to attack the cultivators. On the other hand, the cultivators wanted to escape, but they were surrounded by the swordsmen and were powerless to do so. Moreover, LV Ruochang and the other 3rd-grade illusory swordsmen were injured. Although Hang Ming and the other middle-stage gold core cultivators were weaker than them, they had spirit talismans in their hands. Although the spirit talismans were not as powerful as before in the hands of Hang Ming and the others, they were more than enough to protect themselves. Therefore, the sword cultivators and cultivators were temporarily in a stalemate, each looking forward to the situation turning around. In the blink of an eye, a few days had passed. Although it was only a few days, it was an earth-shaking change for Xiaohua. Xiaohua's sword principle cultivation had been there for a long time. He had been comprehending the sword playing the world for a long time, but he had not had the opportunity to advance further. As for the flying sword technique of the Huan country sword cultivators, Xiaohua had been comprehending it since he obtained Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword's jade slips. The Dream Slayer and Mountain Splitter were excellent proof. It could be said that Xiaohua's comprehension and cultivation of sword principle had reached a very high level. However, because Xiaohua did not have time, he did not condense sword essence. After arriving at Sentry City, he knew that the Dao sect had a unique method of detecting sword essence, so he did not dare to act rashly. But now, he had obtained the Changbai sect's secret technique and the secret technique to directly transform sword qi into sword essence. At this time, it was really a matter of course for him to cultivate the flying sword principle. To put it simply, Xiaohua's sword path cultivation was like a pond. It had been dug out long ago, but no water had been let in, so it couldn't form a beautiful scenery. Now, after a long drought, the rain came from the sky and filled the pond with water. The pond was like a bright pearl, a beautiful scene indeed. Seeing that the vital essence in his body was becoming more condensed and pure, and the sword essence was flowing smoothly in his body like a river of stars, Xiaohua's mouth unconsciously hung a smile. Of course, at the same time, he had some doubts in his heart. Xiaohua did not know that his physical body was formed from the flesh and blood of the demonic phoenix, and this flesh and blood had been infiltrated by the chaotic qi. He only knew that his physical body was strange, and that all magic treasures could not fuse with his body, which was very different from other cultivators. However, the sword essence of this sword cultivator could circulate in his body and outside his meridians, which surprised him a little. Unexpectedly, he also discovered that although the sword origin was flowing freely in his body, it seemed to have some connection with the location of his middle dantian. However, Xiaohua's middle dantian was sealed. He could only make some guesses based on the trajectory of the sword origin. However, when Xiaohua's gaze fell on the flying dream executioner and mountain splitter, there was a bitter smile on his face. Although these two flying swords flew according to the trajectory of the sword essence outside his body, they could only fly outside and could not fuse with his body. There was extreme helplessness in his joy. Maybe it's because of this. Xiaohua muttered in his heart. This young master's sword essence is so tough that it has already reached the illusory sword realm, but sword intent has not appeared. Since there is no sword intent, then this young master does not need to temper at all, which is why I can rush to such a realm in such a short time. This kind of secret technique to absorb sword qi, presumably the sword cultivators of the Huan country also know. But why don't they have so many illusory swords? I'm afraid it's the same as the Dao sex cultivation. It has to be done step by step. The cultivation of a sword cultivator on one hand strengthens the primordial spirit brand in the sword spirit, and on the other hand, tempers one's own sword intent. This refining of sword essence is actually inferior. With only sword essence and no sword intent, one cannot enter the illusory sword or even transform it into a sword. I'm afraid no one will simply absorb sword qi in the sword tomb like this young master. Of course, this young master is also helpless. If I don't absorb sword qi, won't this young master be swollen to death by this sword qi? Xiaohua immediately found an excuse for himself. However, after reaching this point, this young master has once again reached the end. This sword qi, fragmented sword intent, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth are still endlessly pouring in. Although the sword origin looks incomparably pure, there is no sword intent of my own within it. All sorts of mottled and fragmented sword origin fill it. How can I enter the sword transformation stage? Looking at the situation around him and the situation of the Buddhist gold formation, Xiaohua was at his wit's end again. Things did not go as he expected, that there would be a mistake in the process of refining sword essence. The sword qi that was pouring in and wanted to destroy him would unexpectedly stop. Everything was the same as before, moving according to the trajectory. The inertia of this trajectory was so great that it was like a celestial phenomenon. Even the power of the heavenly lightning had imprisoned him, making it impossible for him to stop even if he wanted to. This young master's death is probably coming. Xiaohua was a little sad. This sword tomb is not only the grave of thousands of flying swords, but also the grave of thousands of swordsmen and cultivators. This young master is also going to turn into a purple flower. Thinking of the meaning of the sword tomb, Xiaohua naturally thought of the enlightenment he had when he first arrived at the sword tomb. These flying swords were broken here and laid to rest here. This is the final destination of their bravery in the past. Just like the countless brave swordsmen and cultivators, no matter what reason they fought, they did their duty and did what they should do. Their corpses are laid to rest here, so this place should be respected by all living beings, not destroyed and harassed. Yes, these broken swords have already understood this life. Let this sword tomb be famous throughout the world. Although this young master's name is not known by others, whether it is the terrifying phoenix or that fleeting nameless, I'm afraid that my name will go down in history. Even the phenomenon of this young master condensing his Dan in the sword tomb today will spread out. This young master is also a person whose name will shake the world, and also a sword that will rather break than bend. Chapter 2690. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's heart was filled with determination. That unbending tenacity was also transmitted to the sword essence. Clang! Clang! Two loud sword cries came from the dream executioner and mountain splitter. The two flying swords shook violently. Green and red sword lights were unusually dazzling. Even the sword essence inside and outside of Xiaohua's body was violently boiling. Xiaohua was stunned for a moment before he suddenly laughed towards the sky. Ha 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 ha. That laughter was extremely joyous and bold. The ancient said that if you hear it in the morning, you will die at night. This life is enough. I didn't think that I would comprehend sword intent in this desperate situation. Sword intent, sword intent, it is the intent of flying swords. What is a flying sword? Sir. Sword. Sword. Swords are flying swords. Only swords are true sword intent. There are many sword intents among sword cultivators. Whether it's mountains, flowing water, flying flowers, snowflakes, giant wolves, or even flying phoenixes, they all use all things in the world to explain the essence of flying swords. They all use all things in the world to explain the true meaning of flying swords. Could it be a deviation? Could it be that they are neglecting the essentials? They have really forgotten that only swords would rather break than bend. A sword that stands between heaven and earth with benevolence, heart, truth, and emotions. A sword that does not fear evil, does not fear evil, does not fear wind, does not fear rain, is the true sword intent. Along with Xiaohua's lamentation, even ghost cultivator Huang Yi's tens of thousands of years of grief and comprehension were integrated into his comprehension. The dream executioner and mountain splitter slowly stopped following Xiaohua's comprehension. A fist-sized heart slowly emerged from the sword light. Then, this heart-shaped sword light suddenly expanded, transforming into a small sword several feet long. The dream executioner and mountain splitter merged into the heart sword. Moreover, the heart sword slowly expanded, and the refined sword essence rushed into it. As the heart sword expanded, the sword intent actually penetrated the confinement of Xiaohua's core and the lightning tribulation's confinement outside of the Buddhist gold great array. Wang wang wah. Waves of sword cries came from Xiaohua's body, outside of his body, and even outside of the Buddhist gold great array. It was as if 10,000 swords were bowing down. All the broken swords and sword intents were bowing in front of this sword within the sword. Good. Xiaohua's body also began to flicker with sword light. Within the sword light, Xiaohua's body also began to show signs of transforming into a sword. Seeing this, Xiaohua couldn't help but be overjoyed, and thought to himself, if I can transform into a sword, I should be able to escape the confinement of this phenomenon. Rumble. There was a muffled sound of thunder, and the power of heavenly thunder suddenly rose. Although the sword light around Xiaohua's body didn't dissipate, his body returned to its original state, and he didn't even touch a hair that had transformed into a sword. What can I do? Xiaohua laughed bitterly in his heart. I'm afraid it's still because the sword intent and sword spirit can't fuse into the sword heart. Actually, Xiaohua was still wrong. Not to mention that he was currently in the middle of condensing his core, the celestial phenomenon was shackled, and the lightning tribulation was also hanging in the sky. How could it easily allow him to escape? After all, his body was forged from the flesh and blood of a demonic phoenix, and he had the bloodline of an earth dragon. How could he easily transform into a sword like the others? It's still not right. Xiaohua quickly had another idea. If my cultivation is not high enough, how can I perceive the concept of transforming sword? How can I touch the edge of transforming into a sword? That's right, within this Slayer dream is a split primordial spirit. It's not a projection of the primordial spirit. Xiaohua suddenly realized, this sword spirit is originally this young master himself, and I don't need to cultivate my primordial spirit like an ordinary swordsman. This young master only needs to strengthen his primordial spirit according to the sword spirit molding method, and it will be very easy to fuse with the sword intent, and very easy to form the sword heart. Damn it, Li Xiaobai, Reverend Brightsword, you two are really too powerful. Thinking of this Xiao suddenly understood the importance of the two's orthodoxy, and suddenly understood why the two didn't want to fight. With this kind of wonderful secret technique, as long as one carefully comprehended it, it would be easier for them to transform into a sword than an ordinary swordsman. Wouldn't the comprehension and research of such a secret skill be more attractive to the two of them than fame and reputation? More than that, when Xiaohua's gaze fell on the Slayer Dream and Mountain Splitter's heart sword, he murmured again. The heart sword emitted a faint radiance. This radiance was not only green and red, but it was of all kinds of colors. The modeled sword intent within the sword origin had now rushed into the heart sword and transformed into nourishment for the heart sword intent. The sword intent that had rushed into Xiaohua's body along with the sword light was also attracted by the sword within the sword. Like a myriad of streams returning to their origin, the flying sword slowly expanded, and the dream executioner and mountain splitter actually faintly showed signs of fusing with it. Wasn't this the sign of the sword spirit and sword intent fusing into one? The sword light flashed, and sword chi soared to the sky. Xiaohua's heart sword intent was just at the initial stage, growing like a newborn calf, unexpectedly showing signs of breaking through the restriction. Xiaohua was overjoyed when he saw this. The sword intent was growing strong. Wasn't that his hope of breaking through the restriction? However, this joy only lasted for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. The endless sword intent crazily poured in, and the growth of the heart sword had already exceeded Xiaohua's control. The primordial spirit of the dream executioner felt as if it was floating, as if it was infinitely expanding. Xiaohua could only smile bitterly again. He understood in his heart that he had succeeded in condensing the sword intent, and the sword heart had also taken an embryonic form. However, he had already walked far enough on the path of sword cultivation, and the previous decades of accumulation had been completely exhausted. If the sword intent continued to grow, it would already be out of his control. It might even cause another incessant expansion. Not to mention the Slayer Dream and Mountain Splitter. Even everything from before would turn into flowing water. He could only take the sword intent back into his body while he could still control it. It's really like holding a gourd and a ladle floating up. He almost reached out his hand to hold his head. Is this good? Xiaohua was almost racking his brains. That's right, the tranquil deer sword intent. Xiaohua immediately thought of Reverend Brightsword's flying sword that he had obtained from the valley. Xiaohua had previously thought of taking the tranquil deer sword intent for himself, but since he didn't have any sword essence, he could only treat this as a delusion. The tranquil deer sword intent had only been used once to kill Qin Jian, and had never been used again. Perhaps it could be used here? Thinking of this, Xiaohua quickly took out Reverend Brightsword's flying sword. The moment the flying sword appeared in the air, it immediately let out a sharp sword hum, and at the same time, it let out a resplendent sword light. The sword light was like breathing, and the sword hum was like a challenge. The tranquil deer walked out from the flying sword with the sword light, and its originally tranquil eyes were now filled with a trace of irritation. Meh! The tranquil deer let out a soft cry, and its body shone brightly. As expected, an extremely large amount of sword chi separated from it and flowed into the tranquil deer sword intent, and the tranquil deer's body gradually expanded. Roar! After half a cup of tea's time, the tranquil deer sword intent let out an angry roar, and actually turned into a white tiger, and roared at the heart sword. Clang! Xiaohua's heart sword intent was not afraid of this at all. With a sword hum, the sound shook the surroundings, scaring the white tiger so much that it trembled slightly. However, the sword origin of the white tiger did not retreat even half a step. Looking at the heart sword and the white tiger confronting each other, Xiaohua was dumbfounded. He let Reverend Brightsword's sword intent share the burden of the heart sword intent, and not let them fight each other. Quiet as a tranquil deer, moving as a fierce tiger. Reverend Brightsword's sword intent is actually of these two types. It's one level higher than Qin Jian and the others. Xiaohua sighed, and put away Reverend Brightsword's flying sword. The tranquil deer sword intent also helplessly fell into the flying sword. It's not enough to cause trouble. Forget it, I'll just put away the sword intent. Just as Xiaohua activated the sword origin and was about to put away the sword intent, he was a little unwilling. His heart moved slightly, and he stretched out his hand, and patted his forehead. The 7 sword pellets refined in the Buddha fire were all taken out. The moment the 7 sword pellets jumped out, they immediately rushed into the heart sword intent, and the sword intent poured into the broken sword pellet like a sweet spring. Good, Xiaohua smiled again. Let's count it as another way to make up for it. No matter what the outcome is today, this sword pellet can still be repaired. Just as Xiaohua thought, within the sword intent of the sword within the sword light, sword chi, and sword intent were all incomparably pure. It was the best supplement to repair the sword pellet. Of course, this was also the beauty of Xiaohua's 9 sword pellets coming from the same source. If it were other sword pellets, this kind of repair would only be incompatible and would conflict with each other. However, Xiaohua's sword intent was formed from Dream Execution and Mountain Splitter, and the 9 sword pellets complemented each other. Seeing the cracks on the 7 sword pellets healing at a speed visible to the naked eye, Xiaohua was delighted, but he was also a little scared. He had repaired the sword pellets for so many years, but he couldn't succeed. Looking at this situation, in a short day or even half a day, these 7 sword pellets would probably be completely repaired. From this it could be seen that the sword chi that poured into the heart sword intent was enormous. If he couldn't control this sword chi, couldn't stop this sword chi from pouring in, then his end would be terrifying. Not only was the sword chi pouring in, at the side of the celestial body empowerment technique, the gold attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth was still pouring in. Xiaohua's newly created cultivation technique was still operating at all times. Fortunately, the meridians had just opened, and there was no true essence inside. If Xiaohua wanted to make up for the homework of the foundation establishment stage, he was afraid that it would take several years, or even more than 10 years. Xiaohua didn't need to worry about that place for the time being. Sure enough, in less than half a day's time, the 7 sword pellets were repaired one by one according to the order from big to small. All of them were incomparably round and flawless. If it was any other time, Xiaohua would have already used the sword nurturing technique to project the primordial spirit of dream execution onto these 7 sword pellets. But these 7 sword pellets had just been repaired, and the sword intent began to increase again. Xiaohua didn't dare to think too much, and hurriedly put the sword pellets back into the Buddha fire, and also put away the sword intent. However, just as the sword pellets fell into the small battle inside the Buddha fire, Xiaohua was stunned. That damaged small battle inside the Buddha fire didn't give off the same green-red brilliance as the sword pellets. Even after several decades, there wasn't any change at all, like a pine tree biting down on a mountain without letting go. Chapter 2691. This small bucket must be a rare treasure. Xiaohua's heart moved, and he took out the sword pill and the small bucket together. Maybe it has some use? Xiaohua had taken out a small bucket. It was completely different from when he had taken out Reverend Bright Sword's flying sword and the 7 sword pellets. Everything he had done before had been intentional, and Xiaohua knew that they would definitely be of some use. But this small bucket, Xiaohua was purely trying his luck, purely trying it out. He didn't hold any hope. Who would have thought that the flowers planted with the intention would not bloom, but the willow unintentionally would grow? After the small dipper was taken out, there was no reaction at first, but when Xiaohua raised the small dipper above his head, it was precisely when the sword energy, sword intent, and spiritual energy of heaven and earth poured in. Bas! A faint, almost inaudible sound came from the small bucket, and all the sword chi, sword intent, and spiritual energy of heaven and earth fell into it, not leaving a single trace behind. Ah! There's no mistake. Xiaohua almost didn't dare to believe his eyes. It's that simple? How could it be so simple? Who knows, in a while, this small bucket will burst. This young master had better hurry and leave. Xiaohua almost didn't think, and was about to stand up. Unfortunately, he only moved a little. The celestial phenomenon of condensing the core could be ignored. At worst, Xiaohua wouldn't condense his core, but the confinement of the heavenly thunder didn't stop because Xiaohua didn't condense his core. Instead, because of Xiaohua's movement, Xiaohua was firmly pressed down, and Xiaohua couldn't even move. Isn't this forcing me? Xiaohua naturally thought of that day during the lightning tribulation, when he couldn't struggle at all. I can only face the tribulation? Xiaohua made a fuss for a long time, and in the end, he still had no choice but to clap his hands and take out the 9 dry pills again. Into his mouth. The dry pills were indeed miraculous. As soon as he took them, along with the overflowing medicinal liquid, the true essence in his meridians solidified, and this solidification appeared in both his yin and yang meridians at the same time. The 2 solidified true essences, under the effect of 2 balanced suction forces, flowed along his meridians, and headed towards the light purple object in his dantian. It's actually at the same time? Xiaohua frowned. He was afraid that there wasn't much true essence in the yang meridians, so he hurriedly moved the small bucket hanging above his head to the side, wanting to let some of the heaven and earth spiritual chi flow down. It was a pity that no matter how Xiaohua moved, all of the metal attribute heaven and earth spirit chi fell into the small bucket. Not a single strand fell out. Damn it, why are you even more stingy than this young master? Xiaohua was somewhat displeased, but at this moment, a hurricane appeared around Xiaohua's body. Countless large crystals followed the hurricane and rushed towards Xiao Hua. This young master has been fooled by this sword tomb. Xiao Hua almost scolded himself. He had condensed his own core, and the surrounding astronomical phenomena were all prepared for him to condense his core. How could he lack the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? After scolding himself, Xiao Hua did not dare to hesitate. The crystals were pouring in too quickly, and even the dragon transformation art was unable to deal with it. He had no choice but to use both the heavenly body bestowment technique and the dragon transformation art to quickly refine the crystals and send them into his meridians. Xiao Hua even took a break from his busy schedule. Not only did he send the 7 sword orbs in the small bucket into the sword intent of the heart sword, he also took out the yin-yang sword gourd and sent it into the sword intent of the heart sword. The astronomical phenomena were indeed astronomical phenomena. Those large crystals looked very shocking, but they were the purest spiritual energy. When they approached Xiao Hua's body, they immediately shrank rapidly, as if there was a Sumeru array around Xiao Hua's body. They were all absorbed into Xiao Hua's meridians by the heavenly body bestowment technique. Under the dragon transformation art and the mental cultivation method, these crystals were easily refined. Under the effect of the dry pill, they condensed into a solid state and fell into the suction force of the dantian. They followed the meridians and entered the dantian. However, there were so many crystals, and the speed at which they poured in was so fast that Xiao Hua was really tired to deal with them. Hiss, hiss. The yin-yang thunder pill that had been revolving in his dantian once again emitted electric light. The condensed true essence and crystals all fell into the electric light. At the beginning, that light purple object was only a cluster of illusory light. As the true essence and crystals fell in, that illusory light gradually solidified. This solidification was similar to when Xiao Hua was refining pills. Strange runes appeared on it, and these runes flickered with the electric light, constantly overflowing. Immediately afterwards, the purple object trembled slightly. A black and white brilliance flashed, and a needle-shaped sphere visible to the naked eye appeared out of thin air. Rumble. Following the emergence of this needle-shaped sphere, Xiao Hua's entire body trembled. The brewing heavenly thunder in the sky once again let out a sound, and all the spiritual energy that poured into Xiao Hua's body once again sped up. It's condensing the pill. Xiao Hua had a kind of realization in his heart. However, at this time, his mind was already clear. He didn't think about the lightning tribulation, nor did he care about the sword intent pouring in. Like a machine, according to his own feelings, he sent 9 dry pills into the air to maintain the solidification of his true essence. The dragon transformation art also didn't have any scruples. Ignoring the almost oppressive sound of thunder, it operated at an extremely fast speed, tempering his true essence. One day and night quickly passed. Xiao Hua had taken no less than 600 dry pills, and he was practically taking them non-stop. However, the true essence that was pouring into his body and the true essence still showed no signs of stopping. Is there a mistake? Although Xiao Hua wanted to keep his mind clear, at this time, he couldn't help but jump up and down. When I was building my foundation, I took 360 foundation establishment pills. Now that I've condensed my true essence, don't tell me I have to take 720 dry pills? Looking at the golden core in Xiao Hua's dantian, it was now the size of a fist. Electric light lingered on it, and the 2 thunder cores on the left and right side slowly rotated, occasionally sending lightning into the golden core. I'm afraid it has something to do with these 2 thunder cores. Xiao Hua inwardly muttered to himself. Because he already knew from Zhen Qing's Jade Strip that late-stage foundation establishment cultivators condensing their golden core was different from Qi refining cultivators. There was a process of condensing the golden core, and it was also based on the cultivator's cultivation base. The size of the golden core was determined by the cultivator's true essence, and it took time. A short period of several days, a long period of several months, and even several years. For him to be able to condense his golden core into such a large and perfect size in one day and night, it was definitely unusual. These thunder cores were the most important. But, I'm afraid I don't have many dry pills left. Xiao Hua took a rough look, and secretly complained, if it's 720 pills, it's barely enough. This Yu Qingtian's storage pouch actually had 100 or 200 pills. They were his Yu family's many years of accumulation, and they were prepared to leave them for his disciples. I'm afraid these 700 pills won't be enough. That would be terrible. Where should I go to find more pills at this time? As the saying goes, fortune doesn't come in pairs, and misfortune doesn't come alone. Xiao Hua was just thinking about the dry pills when the deafening sound of thunder fell down. Ah! Isn't this forcing me into a dead end again? Xiao Hua already wanted to cry in his heart, but no tears came out. He really didn't understand. It was just a foundation establishment stage, just a core condensation stage. What kind of bullshit thunder tribulation was this? In Zhen Qing's jade slip, there was no record of this at all. Fortunately, Xiao Hua had already experienced the baptism of thunder tribulation under the altar in the Flame Forest Swamp, so he could be considered to have some experience. He hurriedly calmed his mind, and slowly released his divine sense. Like a thief walking on tiptoe, he probed the sky outside the Buddhist gold great array. However, his divine sense had only just reached a height of several feet when a strange voice unexpectedly sounded in his mind. This voice was somewhat distant, and also somewhat vague. Who? Xiao Hua was startled. This was the most critical moment for him. So how could there be any mishaps? After Xiao Hua withdrew his divine sense, he pondered for a moment, and felt that this voice didn't seem to belong to Little Yellow. Then who else could it be? That's right, Little White. Xiao Hua suddenly realized, and hurriedly entered the mysterious dark clouds. However, at this time, the mysterious dark clouds were different from usual. The entire dark clouds were no longer flowing like before, and were almost completely stagnant. The soul strands that could easily enter and exit the dark clouds seemed to be imprisoned by thousands of times, extremely obscure. What's going on? Xiao Hua had some doubts in his heart, but he didn't dare to be negligent, and hurriedly entered the Heaven Ring of Aura. As soon as he entered the Heaven Ring of Aura, an incomparably suffocating feeling rushed into his mind. Xiao Hua, is there a thunder tribulation outside? Little White didn't wait for Xiao Hua to speak, and hurriedly asked. Yes. Xiao Hua was actually a bit hesitant. Little White wasn't like Little Yellow, and couldn't be considered to understand too much. He still had some things that he didn't want Little White to know. Quickly send me out. Little White urged. What? You want to undergo thunder tribulation? Xiao Hua was shocked. You're just a soul body, how can you withstand the baptism of heavenly thunder? Moreover, if your soul has condensed, you can, but right now, you're extremely weak. There's no need for the entire thunder tribulation, right? Just a trace of heavenly thunder tribulation can turn you into ashes, right? I've gone through thunder tribulation before. I still have some experience with this thunder tribulation. Little White knew that time was pressing, and couldn't explain too much. He said concisely, my own thunder tribulation definitely won't appear at this time. This thunder tribulation isn't my thunder tribulation. You and I are just spectators. Even if we're affected by the thunder tribulation, we definitely won't suffer too much damage. In addition, the thunder tribulation is a death tribulation, but this death tribulation also breeds life. Haven't you heard of it? Thunder gives birth to all things, and this heavenly thunder is the most fertile. Everything in the world is born from the power of thunder. Alright, if you want to refine this trace of your primordial spirit into an avatar, it's best to let it go out and undergo thunder tribulation. This is essential. What? This trace of my primordial spirit? Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. How old is he? Won't he be turned into ashes in the thunder tribulation? Listen to me. Little White said, even if this thunder tribulation destroys this trace of your primordial spirit, your mind will only be damaged. What if it succeeds? The mystery in the future, even I can't explain it clearly. Chapter 2692. All right. Seeing Little White so anxious, Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly waved his soul thread, and with great difficulty, he sent Little White Dragon's soul out of the heavenly ring. The confinement of the lightning tribulation was really powerful. It directly penetrated Xiao Hua's soul. To be able to send Little White Dragon out of the heavenly ring, he definitely spent a lot of effort. However, before Little White Dragon came out of the heavenly ring, it said something that almost made Xiao Hua collapse. Besides, you were affected by someone else's lightning tribulation. When I come out, I can also guide you on how to avoid the tribulation. I can guarantee your safety. Damn it, this is my lightning tribulation. Xiaohua almost wanted to roar. However, there was no need for Xiaohua to say anything. As soon as Little White came out of the heavenly ring, it was immediately restrained by the heavenly lightning. Looking at the surrounding situation, how could it not know that this was Xiaohua's own lightning tribulation? Little White was extremely shocked. It really couldn't understand how Xiaohua, a cultivator from the human realm, could have a demon beast's lightning tribulation. Its entire soul swam a few times in the air with difficulty. It looked at Xiaohua and originally wanted to ask, but seeing that the lightning tribulation was about to arrive, where was the time to dawdle? However, when it saw tiny dough in the air, its body began to tremble. Roar! The little white dragon opened its mouth wide and let out a dragon's roar. Its entire body soared into the air and began to slowly swim around tiny dough. Little White flew up. Xiaohua was a bit hesitant. Little White's words were a kind of temptation. After the primordial spirit was divided, the growth was slow. If it was really like what Little White said, the primordial spirit could become an independent body, then it was worth a try. Let's do it. How many tribulations can there be in life? Xiaohua clenched his teeth. Several primordial spirits that could come out were all sent out by him. Naturally, Xiaohua didn't dare to leave these primordial spirits under the lightning tribulation. That was no different from a naked woman standing in front of a pervert. After Xiaohua sent these primordial spirits into the heart sword, he released all the soul threads in the heavenly ring. Even the Buddha's Saraira was sent out by Xiaohua. Xiaohua really didn't care about the consequences of taking advantage of the situation. After doing all this, Xiaohua let out a long sigh of relief. He released his divine sense once more, probing the air. Alas, fortunately, Little White Dragon is already so excited that it is wholeheartedly preparing to face the tribulation. If it sees that Xiaohua actually has so many primordial spirits, I'm afraid it might fall from the sky. At this moment, the sky was filled with dark clouds, and it couldn't get any lower. Although Xiaohua's spiritual force couldn't completely see through the dark clouds, it was obvious that the range of the dark clouds had already exceeded the size of the last time Xiaohua built his foundation. Moreover, the black clouds had a dark red color. The dark red color constantly flickered and rapidly surged, as if there was endless thunder water rolling within. Looking at the edge of the black clouds again, there were strands of heavenly lightning that were as thick as a thumb jumping around faintly. Occasionally, there were a few strands of lightning that actually had a kind of bright golden color. This golden color was clearly different from the first lightning tribulation Xiaohua encountered. Gotcha! A sound of thunder flashed from where Xiaohua's spiritual force was probing. It was as if the building was overturned, and a series of sounds spread in all directions, stretching for more than 100 li. That incomparably oppressive, incomparably solemn, and even incomparably terrifying heavenly lightnings might had already enveloped the entire Buddhist gold great array, and within 100 li of this might was within this might. Alas, today's lightning tribulation seems to have come a bit early. After Xiaohua's spiritual force probed out, he immediately withdrew it, fearing that he would be hit by the lightning tribulation. When he built his foundation for the first time, the lightning tribulation descended following the completion of his foundation. Although Xiaohua was somewhat caught unprepared, it wasn't to the point of being flustered. But now, there was still a small amount of true essence in his meridians that hadn't solidified. The golden core in his dantian was admittedly the size of a fist, but in reality, it wasn't complete. Now that the lightning tribulation struck down, what do you think Xiaohua should deal with first? Feeling that the heavenly lightning's might was even fiercer than the previous heavenly lightning's might, the remaining true essence in Xiaohua's body began to gradually solidify, and could no longer freely flow. Moreover, with a rumbling sound, a burst of silent thunder resounded in his heart, and a burst of indescribable fear emerged from Xiaohua's heart. Xiaohua understood that the lightning tribulation had already begun. Immediately, everything around him and even within his body couldn't move. He could only rely on his physical body to welcome the lightning tribulation. At this moment, Xiaohua suddenly quivered. Damn it, my true essence has already solidified. Why can't this young master take advantage of this moment to condense his golden core? Thinking of this, Xiaohua waved his hand, and no longer cared about the number of 9. He took out the remaining dry distance pills, and threw them all into his mouth. Gotcha! A series of oppressive sounds of heavenly thunder resounded, and a thread of lightning, as thick as a thumb, sparkled with golden light, was born from the dark clouds, and directly fell down. When that lightning fell on the Buddhist gold great array, it suddenly sprinkled down, and unexpectedly turned into a golden lightning net. That Buddhist gold great array was like snow that met with boiling water, and instantly disappeared. The lightning net fell down, and a part of it fell on Xiaohua's body, and another part fell on Xiaohua's soul, and even more fell on Xiaohua's body. That kind of indescribable pain was born in Xiaohua's body. Xiaohua really wanted to throw his primordial spirit into space to avoid this kind of discomfort, but at this time, his primordial spirit was firmly controlled within his body, and it was simply impossible for him to move. Moreover, after this kind of indescribable pain, an even more intense pain drowned Xiaohua like a tide. Needless to say, this pain came from the primordial spirit within the heart sword. Although Xiaohua's willpower was firm, in front of this kind of pain that was 10 times more painful, he was still on the verge of fainting. Damn it, little white dragon. Xiaohua really regretted that he was too soft, too greedy. Last time, when this young master faced the lightning tribulation, I still had the phoenix celestial body to resist it, but this time. Xiaohua was in pain, and he unconsciously thought of the celestial body he lost. At this moment, his body was filled with golden lightning, and his body was instantly torn apart. However, at the same time the 132 million tiny dots flickered with lightning, flickering in and out of existence. Occasionally, they would undergo nirvanic rebirth, and the fleshly body would instantly heal. Naturally, the lightning tribulation this time was the same as before. Not only did it penetrate his body, it also penetrated deep into his meridians. His already orange bones were covered with lightning, and those lightning threads quickly swam above Xiaohua's bones. Not only was the majority of the blood threads that were torn out of his body absorbed by his bones, but the lightning threads also penetrated into his bones, and the orange color on his bones increased. The blood threads that didn't have time to be absorbed by his bones slowly fell, entering his meridians and dantian. Within his meridians, under the operation of the dragon transformation art, the meridians that were also torn apart by the lightning were constantly being reconstructed, as if a crazy dragon was waiting to be reborn. Within his meridians, the true origin that had yet to solidify quickly solidified under the effect of the heaven separation pill. Moreover, because of the lingering lightning, these true origin condensed into lumps and rushed into his dantian under the push of the lightning. But the strange thing was, these lumps were different from the true origin that was sucked into the gold core before. They couldn't fuse with the gold core from before, but instead closely followed the male and female lightning cores, circling around the fist-sized gold core. As for the lightning threads that followed the meridians into his dantian, they were once again attracted by the male and female lightning cores and rushed into them. Boom boom! 2 crisp sounds rang out, and the male and female lightning cores were actually smashed into pieces. However, at this time, there was a little bit of blood in his dantian, and those blood threads were not afraid of the lightning. The blood threads penetrated into the lightning core, and at the same time, the lightning core rotated and slowly solidified. The dragon transformation art within Xiaohua's meridians was like a coiling dragon, and under the small battle in midair, the soul of the little white dragon was a real coiling dragon. But when the lightning came down, the little white dragon's soul was immediately destroyed by the terrifying lightning tribulation as soon as it came in contact with the lightning threads. However, the remaining little white dragon, which was only the size of a little finger, was once again surrounded by lightning threads, and seemed to have more vitality. The entire soul emitted a strange fluctuation, and threads of silver light seeped out from the small battle, landing on the little white dragon's soul, and the soul actually solidified within the lightning threads. Looking at the Buddha's Saraira, it was also somewhat different from the lightning tribulation from before. The entire Saraira was also first shattered by the incomparably sharp lightning, and then slowly regenerated on the lotus seat of the Buddha's Saraira, solidifying bit by bit. The regenerated Buddha's Saraira was clearly repaired in many places, and the color of the Buddha's Saraira was also much brighter. Next to the Buddha's Saraira, the sword intent of the heart sword also flashed with lightning. This lightning scattered the heart sword in an instant, but after the heart sword was scattered, the benevolent heart did not disappear, and a faint heart-shaped sword image flashed with lightning, enveloping the Dream Executor, Mountain Splitter, and the 7 sword orbs. Even the 2 flying swords and the 7 sword orbs were also surrounded by lightning. Xiaohua's pitiful primordial spirit and the soul threads that stretched out from the heaven ring disappeared in an instant under the lightning tribulation, almost like the sunlight shining through the darkness. However, at the place where the primordial spirit disappeared, an extremely faint, almost undetectable fluctuation suddenly appeared the moment the primordial spirit disappeared. This fluctuation followed the flickering of the lightning threads to the place where the soul threads disappeared, and then followed the traces of the soul threads into the Law Eye's soul mark, and rushed into the mysterious dark cloud. The mysterious dark cloud's location changed even more. The entire dark cloud trembled violently, and countless lightning flashed within, rumbling loudly. It was almost comparable to the lightning tribulation that wreaked havoc on the sword tomb. The fluctuation that entered the mysterious dark cloud rushed inside, and the entire dark cloud swelled. Then, lightning flashed in all directions, and the fluctuation returned with the lightning. After passing through the soul threads flashed with brilliance and gradually took shape. After passing through the soul marks in the Law Eye's soul marks also trembled rapidly, and with this trembling, the Law Eye on Xiaohua's left hand also responded. However, Xiaohua did not notice this change at this time. When the fluctuation returned to the place where the primordial spirit disappeared in the heart sword, the fluctuation became even calmer. A dot of black and white appeared from the fluctuation, and with the appearance of the black and white, lightning immediately rushed over, unceasingly attacking the newly born primordial spirit. Lightning birthed all things. It was indeed so. Chapter 2693. Looking at the benevolent heart again, it only slightly surged a few times, just like a heartbeat. Then, within the flickering lightning, it slowly formed the sword intent of the heart sword. Within the sword intent, in addition to the sword light, there was also lightning. Xiaohua really felt like a year. Although this lightning tribulation did not cause any threat to his life, that kind of stinging pain and itchiness made Xiaohua feel like death was better than living. Xiaohua's divine sense could not leave his body, so he naturally could not see the situation of the small bucket above his head. Although he already knew that the small bucket was a strange object, he still underestimated the power of this small bucket. The mottled sword chi, the broken sword intent, and the extremely tyrannical gold attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth fell into the small bucket like a whale swallowing water. The small bucket's body actually did not change at all. Only under the lightning of the 3 gold lightning tribulation did the lightning threads that fell into the small bucket have a slight reaction. Moreover, the small bucket's damaged areas had some small repairs. Following the repair of the small bucket under the lightning tribulation, there was actually some extremely pure gold attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth leaking out from the small bucket's damaged areas. This gold attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth was different from the silver-white color that entered the little white dragon's soul. It directly poured into the top of Xiaohua's head. And when this spiritual energy entered Xiaohua's body, part of it entered his flesh, part of it entered his meridians, and even part of it rushed into his dantian. In his dantian, there was still the solid true essence and lightning revolving around the golden core, but there were more and more solid objects. This solid true essence was like an even smaller golden core, like a small sphere revolving around the golden core, according to a mysterious orbit. This orbit was actually somewhat similar to the heavenly Tao starry sky. The small bucket's gold chi rushed into his dantian. Part of it adhered to the golden core, part of it adhered to other solid objects, and there was more and more. The remaining part of it wandered around the golden core and solid true essence. After an unknown amount of time, the movement in Xiaohua's body became smaller, and the pain and all kinds of other feelings slowly lessened. Xiaohua let out a long sigh of relief and secretly said, "It's finally over." Thinking of this, Xiaohua prepared to take a look at the situation of his core condensation. But just as he was using inner sight, he didn't see anything clearly. Ka-cha-cha! A golden thread of lightning that was a bit thicker than before struck down again. "Still, do you want me to live?" Xiaohua's body was being suppressed to death, and he was practically roaring in his heart. That's right. Since there was a second heavenly thunder, who knew if there would be a third? Who knew if there would be a fourth? Xiaohua's flesh and blood had been torn to shreds. His recovery speed was already somewhat unable to keep up with the tearing speed. His meridians were also in a heart-tearing and lung-splitting pain. Who knows whether or not the next few bolts of heavenly lightning would directly take Xiaohua's life. Reincarnation after reincarnation. What was the point of suffering for millions of years? Xiaohua endured another wave of pain, as if he was thinking of Huang Yi's bone-deep sorrow. The pitiful Xianxia was using the body of a cultivator to resist the third gold lightning tribulation of a demonic beast. He was probably the most miserable person on the Dawn Rain continent. However, he was not the only one in the sword catacomb who was in such a miserable state. Spirit-devouring Great Formation could no longer be called Spirit-devouring Great Formation. Under the disturbance of Xiaohua's core condensation celestial phenomenon, those spirit-devouring bugs that didn't care whether they were real or fake all pounced on the pure crystal, and most of the real spirit-devouring bugs were killed by the Jindan cultivator's talismans. When the pagoda exploded, those spirit-devouring bugs were even more out of control. No matter how many sword cultivators urged them, those spirit-devouring bugs ignored them. LV Ruochang and the others had no choice but to rush to the sword formation, preparing to use the sword formation formed by the swordsmen to fight against the cultivators. However, under the influence of Xiaohua, there was no spiritual qi of heaven and earth in this sword formation. No matter whether it was the swordsmen or the cultivators, they had no way to borrow strength and had to fall into a helpless stalemate. They all wanted to wait for the celestial phenomenon to end before making a decision. However, the development of the matter once again exceeded the expectations of the middle-stage Jindan cultivators and the third-grade illusory swordsmen. When the terrifying gold nature spiritual qi of heaven and earth was instantly absorbed by Xiaohua, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth that came from afar didn't stop in the sword formation. Instead, it formed a bigger hurricane and rolled to the west. Not only that, LV Ruochang and the others were extremely sensitive to the fact that not only the gold nature spiritual qi of heaven and earth was like this, but the sword qi and the broken sword rain were also swept away. What the hell is going on? LV Ruochang really didn't understand. She only knew that the sword qi and sword essence in this sword tomb had no special benefits for the breeding and tempering of flying swords. What did a cultivator need these things for when he was pregnant? A few days later, things once again shocked LV Ruochang and the others. It was once again far beyond what they had seen and heard. In the sword tomb where there was no lightning, thunder rolled in the sky. Although there was the heavenly thunder, it didn't affect the sword qi and spiritual qi in the sword tomb. In the end, the dark clouds pressed down. Although the heavenly thunder didn't strike down in a large area, only 3 thunder tribulations, under the dark clouds, more spiritual qi, more sword qi, and more sword essence were disturbed. The whole sword tomb was already unstable. After tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years of accumulation, it was gradually collapsing. This was not the most important thing. What was worse was that under the heavenly thunder, there was a strange small battle. That small battle was used by Xiaohua to resist the spiritual qi and sword qi pouring in. At this time, the small battle had changed from passive to active. It continuously absorbed the spiritual qi, sword qi, and sword essence disturbed by the heavenly thunder, adding fuel to the fire. As a result, everything in the sword tomb was affected. The remaining magic array and sword array around the Buddhist gold array were the first to be affected. Traces of spiritual qi and sword qi were sucked out gradually until the entire sword array and magic array collapsed and was sucked into the suction force. Then came the 10-direction annihilation array, which swept away all the spiritual qi and sword qi within dozens of miles. Then came the 4-direction sword array, and the magic array and sword array outside the 4-direction sword array. In the end, the purple jasmine flowers at the edge of the sword tomb rushed into the air. The sky was filled with purple, mixed with spots of blood red mottled, and rushed to the center of the sword tomb. Outside the sword tomb, the wind was also raging. All the swordsmen and cultivators were fleeing in panic. Even outside the sword tomb, the situation was like this. What could LV Ruochang, whose magic array was already destroyed, do? Although the momentum absorbed by the small battle was very large, it was still ineffective against cultivators and swordsmen. However, in this fierce wind, LV Ruochang was like a defeated hen. Her face was pale, and she looked at the countless sword intents rolling up various celestial phenomena in the air in a daze, making the final performance. LV Zhenyu. Rua Ling was also greatly disappointed. She whispered, "We are not lucky, but it's nothing." No. Elverton bit his lips and waved his hand. Even if there is such a strong celestial phenomenon, but this is definitely not something that a pregnant cultivator can have. Let's get ready. Once the celestial phenomenon ends, we will immediately surround and kill the cultivators. I don't believe that just these hundreds of thousands of cultivators can't be killed by our hundreds of thousands of swordsmen. Yes, we understand. When the surrounding swordsmen saw LV Ruocheng's persistence, they could only force themselves to answer. At this point in the battle between cultivators, the result, was it really that important? Gotcha. When the third heavenly lightning came down like a lightning net, Xiaohua wanted to howl miserably. The power of the heavenly lightning was getting fiercer and fiercer each time. Not to mention Xiaohua's pain, the few traces of blood that seeped out were now slowly dripping down along the surface of his body. However, it was also thanks to Xiaohua's primordial spirit. Not only did he painstakingly cultivate the bone-tempering technique, he also painstakingly cultivated the body-tempering technique. Furthermore, he also had the dragon transformation art circulating at all times. I can't let the fourth heavenly lightning come. Xiaohua clenched his teeth and endured the changes in his body. He prayed in his heart, after this heavenly lightning tribulation, I will definitely put more effort in these aspects in the future. When I become pregnant, the heavenly lightning tribulation will be even more shocking. Although Xiaohua suffered a lot, he also benefited a lot. Not to mention that his physical body, meridians, and bones improved greatly under the heavenly lightning tribulation. Even the Buddha's relic was reconstructed under the heavenly lightning tribulation. Except for the part that Xiaohua didn't cultivate, the rest were all solid. However, the strange thing was that there were countless vengeful spirits in the sword tomb. These vengeful spirits were also absorbed by Xiao Dou, and not a single one was left out. Xiaohua originally wanted to expiate a few of them and improve the cultivation of the Buddha's relic, but his wishful thinking was in vain. After the heavenly lightning tribulation, Little White Dragon's soul was really too small. It couldn't be compared to before the heavenly lightning tribulation, but the difference was like heaven and earth. They couldn't be compared at all. However, the sword intent that Xiaohua placed outside was not affected by Xiao Dou. Even when the 3 gold heavenly lightning tribulation struck it, the heart sword didn't show any signs of collapse. Instead, it became stronger under the heavenly lightning tribulation. Not only was there lightning on the surface, there were also countless tiny electric sparks flowing inside. This electric sparks not only flowed through the flying sword, sword pill, primordial spirit, and soul strands, but also seeped into the yin-yang sword gourd. The heart sword intent was like this, but it wasn't much. Xiaohua's Jindan had changed even more. Now, Xiaohua's Jindan was already the size of 2 fists. Moreover, the 2 thunder pills and the solid true essence from before were already gone. It was completely a complete Jindan. However, under the silver brilliance of this Jindan, the first Jindan that was condensed was already intact. The mysterious runes on the surface were naturally formed. The solid true essence from before had now turned into countless silver granules. These silver granules had traces of lightning on the surface. They were like stars revolving around the Jindan in the middle. The 2 thunder pills from before were now much bigger. From time to time, lightning would still be produced from them and fly towards the Jindan in the middle. Chapter 2694. The strangest thing was that between the golden core, lightning core, and granules, there were a lot of silver things. These things were like clouds, in the shape of silk. They were scattered all over the gaps without any pattern. The lightning threads could easily pass through them without being affected at all. This kind of strange golden core. Even if he saw it with his own eyes, he wouldn't dare to believe it. He would definitely be happy and angry at Xiaohua for making things so complicated. Even the condensation of the golden core was a mess. It was unprecedentedly bizarre. Not to mention the condensation of the golden core, when Xiaohua was building his foundation, he created a gimmick of the 18th level of qi condensation, delaying the date of building his foundation for many years. Only now, when he truly condensed his golden core, did the hidden danger of the 18th level of qi condensation reveal itself. It was really because he encountered a special environment like the sword tomb that he was able to pass through this hidden danger. It was really unknown what kind of earth-shattering thing Xiaohua would do when he was pregnant with a golden core like this. Yes, it really was an earth-shattering thing. When Xiaohua passed the 3rd tribulation lightning, his body, which had suffered very little damage, seemed to have been cut into pieces by 1,000 blades. The surface layer was dripping with blood. Most of the blood threads were absorbed back into his body when his body healed after the lightning tribulation. However, there were still some blood threads that dripped down, directly passing through the remnants of the Buddhist gold great array and seeping into the ground of the sword tomb. However, at this time the sword tomb, could it still be called a sword tomb? Roar! A dragon roar came from the little white dragon's mouth. This roar was extremely loud, and it actually had the momentum to shake the surroundings. It was very obvious that it was completely different from before the lightning tribulation. Xiaohua, quickly send me back. I want to meditate. Don't disturb me. Carefully savor the harvest of the lightning tribulation. After the dragon roar, the little white dragon cried out weakly. Okay. Xiaohua didn't say anything, but he muttered in his heart, it's already like this, and you're still trying to show off. What are you shouting for? Thinking of this, Xiaohua sent out his soul strands to entangle the little white dragon. Xiaohua originally thought that his soul strands, which had undergone the lightning tribulation, would be able to easily send the little white dragon into the heavenly ring. In the end, the little white dragon's soul had become much heavier. He still had to expend a tremendous amount of effort to complete this task. Naturally, when Xiaohua sent the little white dragon into the heavenly ring, the several primordial spirits within the heart sword all returned to their original positions. Following which, Xiaohua followed the little white dragon's instructions and began to carefully comprehend it. Xiaohua closed his eyes and sat cross-legged high up in the sky. The Buddhist golden array had been broken and his figure had long since been revealed. However, he didn't move. While he was carefully comprehending the feeling of condensing his core and the thunder tribulation, he was also inspecting his body, meridians, bones, and other changes. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, Xiaohua opened his eyes. His face was filled with joy, but at the same time, he was frowning slightly. Strange, where did the 2 lightning cores in my dantian go? Could it be that because of the lightning tribulation, it fused with this young master's golden core? Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. But if that's the case, then what about this young master's lightning drawing technique? Thinking of this, Xiaohua stretched out his hand and used the lightning drawing technique. At this time, above Xiaohua's head, although the thunder tribulation had already passed, the dark clouds didn't dissipate so quickly. If it were any other time, once Xiaohua's spell was cast, 10,000 bolts of lightning would have already descended. But this time, his thunder drawing technique actually failed. Damn it, there really is a problem. Xiaohua was somewhat disappointed. Looking at the slowly dissipating dark clouds, he was unhappy. This young master's meridians seem to have undergone earth-shaking changes. The tempering of my bones has also reached 99%. Even the strength of my body has greatly changed after the lightning tribulation. But this young master is a terrifying phoenix. Without the lightning drawing technique, this young master can only be a bald man. Alas, this golden core seems to be not small. It's even bigger than the golden core cultivators that this young master killed before. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's body suddenly bloomed with golden light. It was the protective golden light of ordinary golden core cultivators. Go! Xiaohua waved his hand and a fireball flew out. Boo! With a loud sound, flames soared into the sky within a range of several dozen zhang. Hee, Xiaohua's heart was filled with a trace of joy. The method of controlling true essence of a jindan is indeed very different from that of a foundation building. Not only is the magic power several times stronger, even the speed is also much faster. Moreover, with this golden core, even in a situation where there is no spiritual energy of heaven and earth, I can still use great magic. What is this? As far as Xiaohua's eyes could see, there were actually more than a dozen fist-sized spirit-swallowing bugs flying around. One of them rushed towards the place where Xiaohua's fireball was just now, the others were wandering around nearby, and there were even 2 that rushed towards Xiaohua. These are spirit-swallowing bugs. Xiaohua's heart was suddenly filled with joy. He had seen spirit-swallowing bugs in the sword slip before. Why are there spirit-swallowing bugs here? Oh, I reckon that Xiao Dou sucked them here. Thinking of this, Xiaohua waved his Taoist robe, and the space of several zhang was imprisoned. These spirit-swallowing bugs couldn't move at all. Xiaohua then put them all into his sword pouch. The heaven and earth sleeve technique has also improved. This is... Xiaohua's heart was filled with joy again. He released his divine sense, wanting to see if there was anything else that he had missed. However, when he released his divine sense, He saw the purple jasmine flowers sweeping through the sky and the specks of blood spots in the purple sea. He couldn't help but be shocked. Aren't the purple jasmine flowers at the edge of the sword tomb? Could it be? Could it be? Xiao Hua almost jumped up from the ground where he was sitting cross-legged. He looked at Xiao Dou above his head in disbelief. Since Xiao Dou had undergone the thunder tribulation, there had been no pure gold spiritual qi of heaven and earth left behind. Moreover, the damaged parts seemed to have been repaired now. Could it be this thing? Xiao Hua thought and hurriedly released his divine sense. When his divine sense really saw the situation outside the Buddhist gold formation, he opened his mouth even wider. Yes, above the dark clouds, the sun had already appeared. The golden sunlight was sprinkling down, and it looked like the wind was blowing. It was noon. The sword formation, the magic formation, the accumulated sword essence, had long disappeared. How is this possible? The sword tomb. The sword tomb is thousands of miles wide. Xiao Hua's mind raced. Although he already knew that since the purple jasmine flowers at the edge of the sword tomb had been sucked here by Xiao Dou, and the unique gloominess of the sword tomb had disappeared, this fact already proved that Xiao Hua's guess was true. However, he still denied this guess in his heart. After all, this was really too big. Thinking about this, Xiao Hua probed again and released his divine sense. His divine sense was no longer restricted by the sword tomb, and in an instant, it stretched out for nearly 100 miles. Why are there so many Dao sect cultivators here? When Xiao Hua's divine sense swept past the previous location of the 10-direction annihilation formation, he was surprised to find that there were actually many Dao sect disciples here. These disciples were wearing the robes of various sects and looked panicked. When did my Dao sect disciples come to the sword tomb? Xiao Hua was somewhat baffled. But why haven't I seen the sword cultivators of the Huan country? Xiao Hua's divine sense immediately attracted the attention of the Dao sect disciples. Many disciples released their divine senses and swept toward Xiao Hua's direction. However, these disciples' divine senses only swept out 100 feet before they were immediately awakened and hurriedly withdrew their divine senses. Wasn't the divine sense coming from the direction of the pregnant Dao sect master? Wasn't it calm now because the pregnant Dao sect master had successfully stepped into the nascent soul stage and released her divine sense? Which disciple didn't want to live and look for trouble? There are disciples from various sects, and there are even disciples from the Imperial Thunder sect. Xiao Hua was increasingly baffled. Could it be that my Dao sect disciples are fighting with sword cultivators in the sword tomb? He was completely confused. Xiao Hua's divine sense swept around, but he didn't see any traces of a great battle. At this time, all the traces had long been swept clean by Xiao Dou, so how could he still find any clues? Xiao Hua hurriedly withdrew his divine sense and released his Buddhist sense. His Buddhist sense was released for a distance of over 200 miles, and Xiao Hua finally saw some Dao sect disciples fleeing in panic. This is bad. Sure enough, the battle has started. Xiao Hua suddenly realized. This young master's wife is still there. Thinking about this, Xiao Hua's body flourished with sword light. The heart sword standing in midair let out a sword cry and transformed into 2 flying swords, 7 sword pills, and a sword gourd. At the same time that the sword origin returned to his body, Xiao Hua also stored the dream executioner, mountain splitter, and the 7 sword pills into his Buddhist fire. As for the sword gourd, it was stored into the space. After that, Xiao Hua activated the seeing cauldron once more and retrieved the damaged Brahma gold grand array. At the eye of the array, 6 fist-sized metal essence orbs were revealed. The Brahma gold grand array was built on the foundation of these 5 metal essence orbs. If it was in the past, Xiao Hua would definitely be happy, but at this time, he only glanced at it and stored it into the space. After Xiao Hua stored away the Buddha Saraira, his gaze once again fell on the mysterious Xiao Dou. The Xiao Dou was still absorbing spiritual energy of heaven and earth, but this spiritual energy was no longer the same as before. It seemed that because it had absorbed enough, or because other than the sword intent, sword energy, and metal essence of heaven and earth in the sword tomb, other spiritual energy of heaven and earth was useless to the Xiao Dou, so the Xiao Dou's absorption of spiritual energy of heaven and earth was much weaker, far less shocking than before. Xiao Hua was somewhat hesitant. Although the momentum had been greatly reduced, the vortex still existed. Xiao Hua was afraid that he would once again fall into the same dangerous situation as before. If so, wouldn't Xiao Hua be looking for trouble for himself? However, if he didn't store away this Xiao Dou, how could Xiao Hua be willing? Even if Xiao Hua didn't know the power of this Xiao Dou, since it had fallen into his hands, he was unwilling to throw it away. Now that he knew that this object was extraordinary, Xiao Hua was even more unwilling to throw it away. Not good. It seems like there are disciples of the Huanhua sect. Xiao Hua's Buddhist sense had been outside all this time. When he saw that there were actually disciples of the Huanhua sect being chased by swordsmen, he couldn't help but feel anxious. He clenched his teeth and urged the Imperial Thunder Travel to fly towards the Xiao Dou. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The sound of a thunderstorm was suddenly heard. It was even louder than the previous Imperial Thunder Travel. Chapter 2695. Imperial Thunder Transformation. Xiao Hua only had a flash of thought in his mind when he instantly flew below Small Dou. Xiao Hua did not even need to raise his hand. As his figure flashed below Small Dou, his mind wrapped around it and Small Dou was sucked into the space. Boom! Countless amounts of world spirit chi followed the inertia and smashed towards the place where Little Dou disappeared. The enormous force was extremely surging as it directly smashed into the ground. A deep pit that was several tens of feet in size instantly appeared. The soil and dust rose high into the air as countless amounts of world spirit chi continued to rush over. Wave after wave of impact rippled and dispersed into the distance. However, this rapid rippling impact could not catch up to Xiao Hua's figure. Xiao Hua's cheerful laughter scattered across the sky. What is going on? Since the inner cores of the male and female lightning beasts have disappeared, how did my lightning escape technique advance again? Xiao Hua kept Small Dou. His heart was carefree and bewildered. Perhaps it has something to do with the tempering of my physical body? However, just as Xiao Hua thought of this, anger appeared on his face again. He roared like spring thunder, "Who dares to hurt my Dao?" At this point, Xiao Hua realized that this was Li Zongbao's catchphrase. He hurriedly shut his mouth. Thunder rumbled under his feet and his figure suddenly sped up. He did not want to use the lightning escape technique, but in the battle between the sword cultivators and the Dao sect, Fairy Xianxia, Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao were already in a predicament. How could he dare to conceal it? Which bastard dares to hurt my Imperial Thunder Sect disciple? Xiao Hua was helpless as he hastily changed his mantra. He used the two secret techniques of stealing the sky, swapping the sun, and crossing the sea by deception. He also took the opportunity to change his Taoist robe and quickly flew forward. As for the location of the spirit-devouring Great Array, because the sword tomb no longer existed, the place where the sword cultivators and the Dao sect confronted each other was still a little turbulent. However, it was already very different from before. Even Xiao Hua could keep Small Dou in such a situation. LV Ruocheng, Hung Li and the rest could naturally fight to the death. Seeing the sky gradually disappear, LV Ruocheng saw the outcome she had predicted. Although she was shocked by the disappearance of the sword tomb, she was more concerned about killing the Dao sect cultivators. The sword mound was nothing more than a product of the Great War of Dao and Sword. If this sword mound was gone, another sword mound would definitely appear. As long as they killed these hundreds of thousands of cultivators, the existence of the sword mound would be meaningless. Therefore, as soon as the suction force of the small battle weakened slightly, LV Ruocheng personally took action. He urged the sword light to fight with Hung Heng, and the hundreds of thousands of sword cultivators surrounded the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, ready to kill them one by one. Li Zongbao, Xiao Mao and Fairy Xianxia were all in a critical situation. The three of them had been injured earlier, but after consuming the pills refined by Xiao Hua, their injuries had improved greatly. However, during this period of time, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth had changed, making it impossible for them to cultivate in peace. They had to constantly deal with the harassment of sword cultivators, causing their injuries to drag on and unable to fully recover. This was especially so for Fairy Xianxia. Her phoenix celestial body had been severely injured by the 5 elemental sword chi, and she could no longer summon it. She could only use the connate true water to protect herself. Xiao Mao and Li Zongbao. Xiao Mao was only in the middle foundation establishment stage, and his dermic powers had long been depleted. Fortunately, he cultivated the dragonization ability, and when his spiritual chi recovered, he could extract spiritual chi much faster than others. This was why he could fight with Fairy Xianxia. As for Li Zongbao, who had the highest cultivation, now that his immortal piercing whip had been destroyed, he no longer had a suitable dermic treasure. Most of his mystique was on the immortal piercing whip, and without it, he was really restricted. He could not even compare to Xiao Mao. Cla! Elviruchung's sword light shot into the sky, and the sound of the sword humming could be heard. The phoenix sword will flew out from her body and rushed towards Hang Heng. Hung Heng's face was equally gloomy. He pointed his finger, and the talisman in his nascent soul hand flashed with a faint light, and grabbed at the phoenix sword will. Hung Heng's mood was the complete opposite of Elviruchung's. He originally wanted to take advantage of the changes in the sword catacomb to find a flaw in the sword cultivators so that he could lead his disciples to escape from the sword formation. But under Elviruchung's command, the sword cultivator disciples had a tight defense and were impregnable. After several days of stalemate, there was no gap at all. Seeing that the spiritual chi of heaven and earth had become the same as outside the sword catacomb, Hung Heng's heart sank again. Left with no choice, he could only order the Taoist disciples to fight against the sword cultivators, and he himself took out his talisman. If Hung Heng and the others' talismans were normal, they would naturally be able to deal with Elviruchung and the other third-grade illusory swordsmen. But in the spirit-devouring array, these talismans had been devoured by the spirit-devouring bugs and had been damaged. Now, they were definitely insufficient to deal with the enemy swordsmen. After the first contact between the cultivators and the swordsmen after the changes, the cultivators were immediately at a disadvantage. But as the cultivators fought, they tried their best to break out of the encirclement towards the west. On one hand, there were disciples guarding the 10-direction annihilation array there. On the other hand, they were still hoping that the nascent soul stage elder who caused the changes in the sword catacomb would suddenly appear. However, after fighting for another half a day, tens of thousands of cultivators were killed. The remaining 100,000 cultivators were exhausted and their morale was low. Their morale was in stark contrast to the hundreds of thousands of swordsmen. Hang Feng and the others were in despair. Roar! It sounded like a dragon's roar was coming from afar, but it was much softer when it reached this place. But everyone heard it. Humph! Don't think about the nascent soul stage elder. Didn't you hear it? This is the roar of a strange beast, not the nascent soul stage elder of your Taoist sect. Elviruchung's phoenix sword essence was once again crushed by Hung Heng's nascent soul stage elder. Seeing Hung Heng involuntarily look towards the west, Elviruchung sneered. Even if you have a nascent soul stage elder helping you, do you think we sword cultivators don't have a sword transformation stage elder? Don't forget, when we first entered the sword catacomb, the sword transformation stage elder's sword essence was also there. See, that's right. Hung Heng's face turned ashen when Elviruchung saw through his thoughts. That's right. How could a nascent soul stage cultivator compare to a sword transformation stage elder? Even if this nascent soul stage cultivator was willing to help, would he dare to? Are you really going to kill every single one of my cultivators? Hung Yao looked sadly at the cultivators who were fighting hard, especially his own disciples. Under the siege of more than 10 grade 6 bright swordsmen and 2 grade 1 illusory swordsmen, Fairy Xianxia, Xiao Mao and Li Zongbao were already in a perilous situation. If not for Fairy Xia's innate primordial water, and if not for the fact that these swordsmen were greedy for the innate primordial water, the three of them would have died long ago. What? Elviruchung sneered. Didn't you all have the same thought when you were in the Golden Destruction Formation? If we were in a different situation, would you let the sword domain elders go? Hang Heng gritted his teeth and said fiercely, I don't know if I can be as ruthless as you. However, I know that where it is possible to make mistakes, one should spare them. Even if I fall today, there will come a day when you will be forced into such a desperate situation by my Dao sect's disciples. Ha ha ha. All right, I will wait for that day to come. Elviruchung laughed and threw away his previous coldness. I'm afraid you will never see that day in your life. At this moment, in the western sky, rolling thunder sounded from afar. The sound of thunder was like the beating of a war drum, crushing the courage of the sword cultivators. It's finally here. Hung was delighted. A nascent soul stage cultivator's aura came from afar, slowly pushing towards them. However, this aura was a little strange. It only flashed across the sword formation before it was retracted. Then, an angry roar sounded. "Which bastard dares to hurt my Imperial Thundersect disciples?" This voice was like a clap of thunder, shaking the hearts of hundreds of thousands of sword cultivators. They could not help but quietly retract their sword light. LV Ruochang felt the aura of a nascent soul stage cultivator and his expression turned cold. He gritted his teeth and the phoenix sword intent that was about to charge towards Hang Hang also stopped in midair. He looked up into the distance. In the distant horizon, where the thunder was rumbling, a powerful divine sense swept over. At the same time, a short figure flew into everyone's vision at a speed faster than rainbow transformation. Senior brother Nameless? Seeing Xiao Hua's appearance after his transformation, Mingyu was the first to cover her mouth and exclaim, "Ah!" The second to be shocked was Fairy Xianxia. For a moment, she did not understand. Was this Nameless the real Nameless or Xiao Hua's Nameless in disguise? After all, this was the nascent soul stage Nameless. Xiao Hua was far from the nascent soul stage, right? However, although Xiao Hua's spiritual will had undergone a huge change after condensing his core, there was still a trace of familiarity within it. Furthermore, when Xiao Hua had arrived at the scene, he had looked at her with concern. Fairy Xianxia immediately understood. This nascent soul stage senior was none other than her lover, Xiao Hua. Senior brother Nameless. Heng Hing naturally knew Nameless' name. Seeing the rumbling thunder, how could she not know that this was Nameless? She hurriedly called out. But after calling out, she realized that this was Nameless after his pregnancy. He was her senior, so she immediately changed her greeting. Disciple Heng Heng greets Senior Nameless. Da Sun, Xiong Song and the other surviving Golden Core stage cultivators all bowed and greeted Senior Nameless. Xiao Hua was very pleased with himself. However, he did not really fly close to the battle. Instead, he stood far away in the sky and waved his hand. "You all wait." Then, his gaze swept across the entire battlefield. He frowned and said coldly, "You all are actually fighting in the sword tomb? My Dao sect disciples. Other than those from the west, are there only so many left? What about Qian Mo?" Senior Nameless should know that Qian Mo had already fallen before coming to the sword tomb. Yuan Zhongyu immediately bowed and said, "That day, Qian Mo followed me to the clear cave and was forced to self-destruct by the swordsman Lu Ruocheng. If not for Qian Mo's sacrifice, I'm afraid all of us would have fallen into Lu Ruocheng's trap." Chapter 2696. Qian Mo is dead? Xiao Hua was slightly taken aback, and the image of that righteous golden core cultivator appeared in his mind. "That's right, it's LV Ruocheng's trap," Heng Ju hurriedly said. "She pretended to be weak outside the sword catacomb, and lured our cultivators into the sword catacomb. Furthermore, she set up the Yin-Yang sword formation, the five-element sword formation, the spirit-devouring formation, and even a soul cultivator formation. She wanted to exterminate hundreds of thousands of our disciples." Exterminate? Xiao Hua really didn't expect LV Ruocheng to have so many tricks up her sleeves. Before he participated in the battle, she set up such a huge trap. If he didn't condense his core in the sword catacomb, perhaps, not only him, but also Fairy Hongxia, Li Zongbao, Xiao Mao, and all the other Dao sect disciples would have died in the sword catacomb. Seeing Xiao Hua frown, Heng Ming hurriedly bowed and said, "Fortunately, Senior Wu Ming's pregnant celestial phenomenon broke the sword cultivators' battle and saved our 100,000 disciples. Disciple Heng Ming brings the 100,000 disciples who survived to thank Senior for his great kindness." All the disciples bowed in unison, saying, "Thank you Senior Nameless for your kindness." Obviously, Heng Ju was afraid that Nameless wouldn't make a move, and wanted to use this righteousness, using the lives of the 100,000 disciples to ask Nameless to make a move. However, Nameless was Xiao Hua, and he came to make a move. How could he not make a move? However, how to make a move was another problem for Xiao Hua. "You are LV Ruocheng?" Xiao Hua's gaze fell on the female swordsman opposite Hang Ju, who had already regained her indifference. "Junior LV Ruocheng greets Nascent Soul Senior." LV Ruochang's tone was cold, but her etiquette was considerate. She bowed and said, Junior has already heard of Senior's name. Many thanks to Senior for sparing our lives in the Seven Extremes Mountains. Junior Elver. The other third-grade illusory swordsmen were extremely unwilling, but they also bowed helplessly. This helplessness was the same as when Xiao Hua bowed when he saw the swordsman near the Yinyang Twin Springs mountain. And you can wait. Xiao Hua waved his hand. I understand what you mean by waiting. This old man didn't participate in the battle, and now I'm a nascent soul senior, so it's not suitable for me to participate in your battle. Hung Ju's heart grew anxious as he silently complained about how the Imperial Thunder Sect was as pedantic as Qian Mo. He wanted to say something. In fact, Xiao Hua's heart was also full of discomfort. Concealing one's cultivation level and being a foundation establishment cultivator, one could really run amok. But how could he be so restrained after acting like a nascent soul senior? However, do you think that I can just stand by and watch as 100,000 Dao sect disciples die in your ambush? Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and said, not to mention that this old man is unable to face the master of the Imperial Thunder Sect, I'm afraid that this old man's future cultivation will also have inner demons. Senior, if you want to interfere, then do your best. Lu Ruochang said coldly. Senior, you are not the only nascent soul cultivator here. There are also sword transformation masters in our sword domain. Xiao Hua sneered. Are you threatening this old man? It's not a threat, it's a fact. Lu Ruochang wasn't afraid at all. Since Senior didn't participate in the battle, don't worry too much about it. Your Dao sect's cultivators actually talked about the loss of your sect, but what about the loss of my sword domain? Your Dao sect's cultivators set up the 10-direction annihilation formation in the sword tomb. Didn't they also lure my sword cultivators into an ambush? Didn't they also kill hundreds of thousands of my swordsmen? There's such a thing? Xiao Hua immediately understood the reason why he saw the disciples of the various sects earlier. In short, this is not the time for nascent soul senior and sword transformation senior to appear, and senior is also not a gold core cultivator who is participating in the battle. Therefore, I hope that senior can distinguish right from wrong and withdraw as soon as possible. Lu Ruochang said word by word, otherwise, when sword transformation senior of my sword domain arrives, it will be hard to say anything. How can there be any sword transformation masters in this sword tomb? If there are falling gold mountain cultivators, there are still some. Xiao Hua secretly curled his lips. Senior nameless. Don't listen to her nonsense. Xiong Huasong immediately shouted. Before the swordsmen were ambushed, there was indeed a sword transformation master sword intent at the place where Senior came from, but the swordsmen were killed. There was no trace of sword transformation Senior at all. Oh, I understand. Xiao Hua naturally knew the cause of the matter. The sword transformation master's sword intent was definitely Zhang Yuha's doing. This was what Xiao Hua saw that day. Therefore, Xiao Hua was even more certain that there was absolutely no sword transformation in this sword tomb. Nonsense, if there was a sword transformation in the sword tomb, how could Xiao Hua successfully condense his gold core? Or rather, if the sword transformation was in the sword tomb, could it escape the suction force of small dough? Lu Ruochang. Xiao Hua raised his head and said coldly, what do you think your sword transformation swordsmen can say when they see this old man? My sword domain sword transformation senior and Dao sect's nascent soul senior are all seniors in our eyes. No matter if it's a war or a peaceful time, we disciples should respect them. Lu Ruochang said neither arrogantly nor humbly. As for what seniors say to each other, how would this junior know? Alas, the war between Dao sect and sword cultivators has already lasted for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. The number of swordsmen and cultivators that died in the sword tomb is also unknown. Among them, there is no lack of outstanding talents. If it weren't for the war, they would all be able to prove their Dao. Xiao Hua sighed slightly and had the appearance of an expert. This old man won't talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the war. The 10-direction annihilation formation swordsmen suffered great losses. The 4-direction sword formation cultivators suffered great losses. Both sides can be considered even. After today, it will be the battlefield of the various senior brothers. You all should know when to stop. Lu Ruocheng didn't give in and said indifferently, my sword domain sword transformation senior still hasn't appeared. This junior doesn't know if I can stop. Moreover, senior doesn't seem to be a Dao sect disciple participating in the war. You don't seem to have the qualifications to say these words, right? Xiaohua frowned and felt very ashamed and angry in his heart. It wasn't that he didn't want to give this Lu Ruochang some color to see, or even take her life. However, he really didn't know what method to use. He didn't know what spell to use, what ability to not reveal his identity. Thinking for a moment, Xiaohua could only say again, right and wrong in the war between Dao cultivators and sword cultivators, no matter what is said, it's useless. You and I are the difference between friend and foe. So much. What's the use? This old man is asking you right now whether or not you can stop. It's useless. Lu Ruochang also said coldly. This junior is only reminding senior that nascent soul cultivators and sword transformation cultivators are all seniors. You can't lower yourself to the same level as us juniors. If senior violates this rule, don't blame my sword domain sword transformation cultivators for attacking foundation establishment and chi condensation cultivators for no reason. As for whether or not I should stop, this junior still has the same words. This junior doesn't have the qualifications to say that I should stop. Ha ha ha, Xiaohua raised his head and laughed heartily. He pointed his finger and said, don't say that there are over 300,000 swordsmen here. Do you think these swordsmen can be my match? In fact, Lu Ruochang's thoughts were exactly as Xiaohua thought. She really wanted to use these 300,000 swordsmen to fight Xiaohua. She firmly believed that Xiaohua absolutely didn't dare, or perhaps disdained to do such a thing to the drawing sword swordsman. And she absolutely dared to use these 300,000 swordsmen to fight Xiaohua. However, Lu Ruochang said indifferently, this junior doesn't dare to think like that. These sword cultivator disciples are just ants in senior's eyes. Senior only needs to stretch out a finger to pinch them to death. Everything depends on senior's thoughts. Nonsense. Xiaohua was somewhat displeased. He wasn't a nascent soul cultivator and didn't have the awareness and self-restraint of a nascent soul cultivator. He said coldly, tell me my 600,000 disciples, will you release or not release? What if I don't release? What if I release? Lu Ruochang also threw caution to the wind and said coldly. In fact, Heng Jiao and the others were already anxious. They even disapproved. Why would a nascent soul cultivator talk so much nonsense with illusory swordsmen? Just directly kill them. Although there were 300,000 swordsmen, even if a few escaped, would the Dao sect still admit that it was a nascent soul cultivator? They only needed to kill Lu Ruochang and the other illusory swordsmen. At this time, when they heard Lu Ruochang forcing Xiaohua into a dead end, they also looked at Xiaohua anxiously, as if they were waiting for Xiaohua's decision. Damn it! How could Xiaohua not know what these gold core cultivators meant? Not to mention that he wasn't a nascent soul cultivator. Even if he was, he still had to consider his own sect. If he killed all the illusory swordsmen, what would happen to the Imperial Thunder sect? How would Chen Lazy explain to the Huan country's sword cultivators? Release. Naturally, it's good for you, it's good for me, it's good for everyone. Xiaohua said coldly. If you don't release, then you die. It's not good for me, it's not good for everyone. Xiaohua was also very ruthless. He now regretted wearing the Imperial Thunder sect's clothes and appearing as nameless. Then, this junior would rather die. Lu Ruochang's face was pale. His slender eyelashes fluttered slightly, but his eyes were like the moon in the night sky. He stared at Xiaohua without the slightest fear. You are forcing me. Xiaohua said word by word. He slapped his forehead. He vaguely remembered the hand of the nascent soul cultivator in the ink-black forest. A huge hurricane appeared, and the surrounding heaven and earth spirit chi condensed around Xiaohua's body. That aura was not inferior to that of an ordinary nascent soul cultivator. Ever since Xiaohua created the foundation establishment cultivation method, his confidence skyrocketed. He believed that with his cultivation of the heaven and earth sleeve, he could definitely use the hand of the nascent soul. Even if there were any mistakes, he was just a nascent soul cultivator. What was so hard to explain? Seeing the heaven and earth spirit chi within 100 feet being absorbed by Xiaohua, Ruoling and the others' faces changed slightly. Heng Jiao and the others were also happy. As for Fairy Xianxia, she was a little shocked. The heaven and earth spirit chi condensed rapidly. Xiaohua slightly spread his robe, and the power of imprisonment enveloped Lu Ruochang for 100 feet. A faint palm mixed with rocks and the others were already beginning to take shape. Senior Nameless, Ruoling said anxiously. The outcome of the battle has already been decided. Even if Senior kills Junior Sister Lu, what benefit will it bring to the battle? Besides, why should Senior lower himself to the same level as us? Senior, please stay your hand. Chapter 2697. Who said the outcome of the war has already been decided? How come this old man doesn't know? Xiao Huan narrowed his eyes, his tone cold, as if he had already made a decision. He didn't believe that after he killed LV Ruochang and the others, the cultivators of the 3 cultivation countries would sell the Imperial Thunder Sect to the sword cultivators of the Huan country. Hiss! Ruoling and the other swordsmen sucked in a breath of cold air, realizing that Xiao Hua was truly angry. It seemed that he was going to interfere with the war with the power of a nascent soul. Zhu Chengye's expression changed slightly, and he almost flew back a few steps, as if preparing to command the swordsman. Looking at LV Ruochang again, she felt even more regretful. Her previous words didn't involve the war, and she only focused Xiao Hua's attention on her. She even wanted to use her own life to exchange for the lives of 100,000 cultivators, but she didn't expect that Xiao Hua didn't care about the bearing of a nascent soul cultivator and wanted to kill her. She had overreached herself. Seeing that Xiao Hua's nascent soul hand was about to form, Xiao Hua's expression became even colder. Ruoling and the others unconsciously clenched their fists, preparing to work together to receive the attack of a nascent soul cultivator. But at this moment, whoosh! A long cry of a flying sword came from afar, and a golden light flashed and landed in front of Elvirochang. A flying sword message? All the sword cultivators were stunned. Because of the special nature of the sword tomb, they couldn't directly use flying swords to send messages. Now that the sword tomb had completely disappeared, a flying sword message could naturally be sent. This was beyond the expectations of all the sword cultivators. However, this flying sword message was right in front of LV Ruochang, and LV Ruochang was restrained by Xiao Hua. Although this restraint wasn't to the extent that LV Ruochang couldn't move, LV Ruochang didn't dare to struggle desperately. Let this old man see. Which old sword ghost sent this message? Xiao Hua coldly looked at Lu Ruochang. Without any trace of politeness, he raised his hand and the flying sword message obediently fell into his hand. A small flying sword flew into Xiao Hua's hand. Xiao Hua released his divine sense and immersed it in to take a look. His face unconsciously revealed a look of astonishment. After a few minutes, he flung his hand, and the flying sword landed in front of Elvirochang. He coldly snorted and said, "Elvirochang, you're a schemer. Zhenjin, let me, all of you scram." As he spoke, Xiao Hua loosened the heaven and earth within sleeves technique. His figure flew up slightly, leaving LV Ruochang more than 10 feet away. When Hangju saw Xiao Hua's attitude, he couldn't help but be stunned. After Xiao Hua saw the flying sword message, he didn't seem to want to care about this matter anymore. Could it be that this is the swordsman's letter? All the cultivators and swordsmen had the same thought. However, LV Ruochang's face was very indifferent. He took the flying sword letter and looked at it carefully. His face flushed instantly. He raised his head and laughed. His earlier indifference disappeared. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. So what if this sword falls today? Your Dao sect cultivators have suffered such a crushing defeat. As a nascent soul cultivator, what can you do? A lone tree cannot hold up the sky. Isn't that the case? Junior Sister Lu. Ruling was shocked and hurriedly flew in front of Lu Ruochang to stop her from being overjoyed. Senior Sister Ruoling, look. LV Ruochang gave the flying sword to Ruoling and said, "This sword's wish has been fulfilled. Even if this sword falls here today, this sword can still smile and meet the fallen seniors of the sword region." Ruoling picked up the flying sword and looked at it carefully. Her face was also overjoyed, but there was also a trace of realization in this joy. Ruoling understood, but everyone else was kept in the dark. They were all confused. Hung Ju, Xianxia Song and the rest looked at Rua Ling, then at Xiao Hua. Rua Ling's joy was needless to say, but Xiao Hua's face was gloomy. Needless to say, the news in this flying sword was definitely bad news to the Dao sect cultivators. But what exactly was the bad news? Could it be more tragic than the destruction of 100,000 cultivators in the sword tomb? Senior Nameless? Rua Ling didn't pass the flying sword letter to Xianxia and the rest. Instead, she bowed slightly and asked, Junior, can I tell everyone about this matter? This is a matter of war. It has nothing to do with this old man. Xiao Hua waved his hand and didn't answer. However, he didn't leave either. Clearly, the matter on the flying sword letter had already surpassed this. Hung Ju and the rest felt their hearts skip a beat. They all looked at each other in dismay. They really didn't know what could be more unexpected than this. Let the brave warriors of the sword region know. Rua Ling cleared her throat and said loudly, under the command of LV Ruocheng and fellow swordsman LV Ruocheng, Skyscraper Ridge, Soaring Wind Sword Sect, Swarm of Owls Valley, Mountain Crossing Ridge, Cloud Cave, and other swordsman friends suddenly attacked the Lian Kingdom. We obtained a major victory. The Lian Kingdom's Peaceful Shepherd Prefecture's Mo family, Shilong City's Jian family, Qingji Zali family, and other 13 cultivation families, as well as Lu Meng sect and Mount Duckweed, have now fallen into the hands of our sword region. This news absolutely exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only the Dao sect cultivators, but even the sword cultivators of the Huan Kingdom were shocked. For a moment, everyone was stunned, and the entire battlefield was silent. Wu immediately after, all the sword cultivators cheered, and all of them were abnormally excited. As for Hung Ju, De Sun, Xianxia Song, and the rest, their faces were ashen. They never thought that the sword cultivators' true goal was the Lian Kingdom. They really didn't think that the sword cultivators would actually want to open up a territory in the Lian Kingdom. They also never invested too many Dao sect disciples in the Lian Kingdom. Now, this news was tantamount to a bolt from the blue to them. Ruling looked at Lu Ruocheng, whose face was deathly pale but whose eyes were filled with joy and whose cheeks were slightly flushed. She really didn't know what to say in her heart. This kind of diversion tactic, this kind of strange arrangement, was really not something she could have guessed. Right now, even if Xiao Hua killed Lu Ruocheng, even if he killed 300,000 sword cultivators, the Lian Kingdom wouldn't be able to seize the Lian Kingdom. However, it was impossible for the Dao sect's cultivators to easily seize the territory of the Ripple country. Xiao Hua's actions were of no benefit to the Dao sect's war. It could only incite the anger of the sword domain. Perhaps this anger could only be directed at the Imperial Lightning sect. Would Xiao Hua do this kind of thing? Xiao Hua naturally wouldn't do it, because he had just said it. All of you scram. Rua Ling quietly pulled on Lu Ruocheng's sleeve, and didn't say a word, but her gaze already explained her meaning. Although Lu Ruocheng bit her lips tightly, and was unwilling in her heart, but she wasn't a fool. Knowing when to stop was the right thing to do. If she stubbornly persisted, she would definitely end up like Qian Mo. Seeing that Lu Ruocheng didn't speak, Rua Ling nodded slightly at Xianxia. Xianxia hurriedly raised his hand and said, Warriors of the various sword domains, we will return in triumph. As he spoke, he waved his hand and flew to the north of the sword tomb. Naturally, the sword tomb was no longer the same as before, and there was no need for any flying swords to scout the way. The group of sword cultivator disciples puffed out their chests and valiantly flew away with Xianxia. Although Lu Ruocheng was extremely unwilling in her heart, she still resentfully left under Rua Ling and Mu Ting's hands. Sigh, Xiao Hua sighed, and a sense of helplessness arose in his heart. Yes, he could ambush Qin Jian and Lu Ruocheng, but these actions couldn't change the situation of the Dao cultivator war. A cultivator, whether it was Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core or nascent soul, the effect they could play was too little. The reason why a war was called a war was because of the coordination, planning, and scheming. These were not Xiao Hua's forte. Then, Xiao Hua waved his hand, and his figure flew up again. Thunder rumbled around him, and he was about to fly away again. Senior Nameless. De Sun hurriedly shouted, We thank Senior for saving our lives. There's no need for that. Xiao Hua's interest waned, and he shook his head slightly. All the heavenly phenomena that broke the sword formation and whatever shocking thunder, they have nothing to do with me. With my cultivation, it's impossible for me to trigger any lightning tribulations. This sword tomb has undergone such a huge change. This is not something that I can do. I just happened to pass by and saw the changes in the sword tomb, so I came to take a look. It's also a fluke that I was able to save all of you. Now that all of you are tired from the war, let's wait for the other senior brothers to come over. Senior, please wait for a moment. Hung Li came to his senses and hurriedly said, Disciple and the others should also report to Senior about fellow Taoist Qian Mo's deeds. Qian Mo? Xiao Hua shook his head slightly. He only had a bad impression of Qian Mo, and did not have a trace of good impression of him. He simply did not want to hear about his death. You all better report to the senior brothers of the Imperial Thunder Sect. After saying that, Xiao Hua did not stay any longer. Stepping on the shocking thunder, he flew towards Nan Feng. However, his lips moved slightly, as if he was saying something. Senior. Hung Li opened his mouth, wanting to keep Xiao Hua, but when he saw that Xiao Hua did not pay attention to him, he felt a sense of disappointment and frustration in his heart. That's right, what's the use of keeping this nascent soul senior? Not to mention the great defeat of the Sword Tomb, even in the entire Dao Cultivator War, the cultivators of the Dao sect were also defeated. The faces of the Golden Core cultivators in the conference hall had long been lost. Looking around again, how many of the Golden Core cultivators in the conference hall survived the four-direction sword formation of the sword cultivators? Not to mention, among the 27 most famous sects, only 13 cultivators survived, and all of them were injured. The sects that were not famous most likely had already fallen. The war had reached such a stage, and the cultivators of the Dao sect could be said to have suffered a crushing defeat. Forget it, Hung Li looked at Xiao Hua's disappearing figure, and the sound of thunder that was getting softer and softer in his ears, and somewhat weakly ordered, Regroup! We will return to Sky Patrol City. That's right. Dasun suddenly thought of something, and with a low exclamation, he shut his mouth again. What's wrong? Cheng Ming was beside Dasun, and his meridians were also greatly damaged. When he heard Dasun's low exclamation, he asked softly. Just now, the strange phenomenon in the sword tomb, that faint dragon roar. What's going on? Dasun lowered his voice and said, I don't know if it was done by Senior Wu Ming. Also, the sword tomb where 10,000 lightning bolts do not occur, why would there be a lightning tribulation? I have never heard of it before. Chapter 2698. Cheng Ming shook his head slightly, looked at the place where Xiao Hua disappeared, and said, Didn't Senior Nameless say it just now? It seems that the dark clouds of the lightning tribulation and the disappearance of the sword tomb have nothing to do with him. And this is not something a nascent soul master can do. Senior Nameless came and went in a hurry. I'm afraid he's going to find out the truth of this matter. Otherwise, Lu Ruocheng will definitely not be able to keep his life. Dasun nodded slightly, but he was still a little confused. What fellow Cheng said is reasonable, but if it's not Senior Nameless, who in this sword tomb can have such magical power? When did the sword tomb have a strange beast? How can there be a dragon's roar? Who knows if it's a dragon's roar? In short, it might be some strange beast. However, even if it's possible, I don't believe that it's Senior Nameless doing. Cheng Ming was a little disdainful. Didn't you see it just now? Senior Nameless nascent soul technique can't be used perfectly. This sword tomb is thousands of miles wide, with thousands of years of sword energy. Not to mention a nascent soul master, even a spirit-severing stage senior can't do it. There must be a big anomaly in the sword tomb. A strange beast is going through the lightning tribulation again. And Senior Nameless is just pregnant. This situation is also our luck. Speaking of this, Cheng Ming smacked his lips, with a look of lingering fear. He lowered his voice again, afraid that the sword cultivators who had already gone far away would hear him. This kind of coincidence can only be believed by those sword cultivators who don't know the details of our Dao sect cultivators' advancement. If not, with Senior Nameless nascent soul cultivation, he might not be able to kill so many third-grade illusory swordsmen. If not, those third-grade illusory swordsmen would have fallen out with Senior Nameless long ago, right?
Yes, it should be so.
Hang Zhao and the others were very knowledgeable, so they naturally had the same tolerance. But seeing De Sun nod again, he said, "Previously, I was a little worried for Senior John Doe. If it weren't for the flying sword message, you wouldn't have been able to find a way out. If you wanted to save us, you would have to kill LV Ruochang." Once he made his move, Ruoling and the other sword cultivators would have no choice but to act. Not to mention that old man. Even our lives are in danger. Nameless is indeed a senior from the Imperial Thunder Sect. Yuan Fengju aside. He and Chen Mo are really similar. Obviously, with his cultivation level, he might not be able to save us. Yet, he refused to give up. If he didn't save us, he wouldn't turn back. He doesn't even take Lu Ruochang's threat seriously.
Indeed.
Hang Zhao chimed in. Once we return to Sky Patrol City, the first thing we need to do is to inform the masters of the various sects about the outcome of the war. The second thing is to report the matter of Senior John Doe saving us, so that the teachers can be prepared to assist Senior John Doe at any time. Don't let him be besieged by the swords of Huan country. Not bad. All the Golden Core cultivators nodded. We are indebted to Senior John Doe. We must take responsibility for this matter on behalf of Senior John Doe and the Imperial Thunder Sect. We must not let him and the Imperial Thunder Sect be attacked by the swords. The group of Golden Core cultivators was not in a hurry to fly away. They knew that the sword cultivators had retreated and had achieved an unprecedented victory in Huan country. Lu Ruochang and the others would never do anything unnecessary, and the sword cultivators would never chase after them again. Hence, they urged the remaining 100,000 or so disciples from various sects to fly west and meet up with the other disciples before returning to Sky Patrol City together. The 100,000 disciples' faces were filled with joy, the joy of escaping death. They did not care about the Huan country being attacked by the sword cultivators. In their eyes, as long as they could escape with their lives, it was better than anything else. Moreover, they also knew that as the survivors of the early stage of the sword battle, they were all meritorious. Although they did not know if they had to continue to stay in Sky Patrol City to fight with the swordsmen after the nascent soul masters arrived, it was obvious that the Dao sect cultivators were defeated and they were also badly injured. They were not fit to fight again. What they had to do now was to return to Sky Patrol City and meditate first while waiting for the nascent soul masters to arrive. Then, they would most likely have to return to their sects with the flying ship. Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao stood in mid-air with a puzzled look on their faces. Xiao Hua's divine thought had become much stronger, so they could not immediately tell that John Doe was Xiao Hua. However, they knew that John Doe first appeared in 7 Extremes Ridge. That was also the time when Xiao Hua went to 7 Extremes Ridge to rescue them. If there was no accident, John Doe should be Xiao Hua. After all, the Imperial Thunder Sect would not have so many powerful disciples for no reason. However, whether John Doe was Xiao Hua or not depended on Fairy Xianxia, who was at 7 Extremes Ridge that day. Unfortunately, when Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao looked at Fairy Xianxia, she did not pay them any attention. Her gaze fell on Ming Yu's face, who was not too far away from her. Ming Yu's eyes were filled with surprise, regret and longing. She was looking in the direction where Xiao Hua had disappeared. It seemed that she had been staring at Xiao Hua and had not been satisfied. It also seemed that her gaze could penetrate space and see Xiao Hua's not very tall figure. Sigh, for no apparent reason, Fairy Xianxia felt a ripple in her heart. However, a trace of pride appeared at the corner of Fairy Xia's mouth. She muttered in her heart, "Husband, what is he doing? When will he be able to conceive a baby? If it's about core formation, it's about the same. And where did he get such a powerful divine ability to make the sword catacomb disappear? Looks like, when I see him later, I'll have to ask him a few more questions." Fairy Xianxia thought as she flew up with the group of disciples. She inadvertently turned her head to look at the sword catacomb that had become very ordinary. This sword catacomb is no longer the sword catacomb. It will no longer be a dangerous place. Sigh, I'm afraid my country of Xi. Fairy Xianxia flew away. Li Zongbao and Xiao Mao also flew away. Hang and the rest also flew away. Everyone's gaze shifted away from the sword catacomb. In their hearts, They all thought that the sword catacomb would no longer exist. What they didn't know was that under the sword catacomb, an unknown depth, there was an unknown space. Layers of black and red lingered on the surface of the space. A body that was dozens of feet in size was lying on the ground. This body was covered in black gas, making it impossible to see its true appearance. The body was quiet, without any movement. However, the calm and orderly swirling black and red suddenly started to boil. It was as if there was some unforeseen event. The swirling blood emitted a faint fluctuation that slowly spread into the space. The black gas on the body was also disturbed and gradually rippled. The strangest thing was that above this space, some of the blood that dripped down from Xiaohua's lightning tribulation slowly fell. Although it wasn't directly above this space, it seemed to have some suction force. It slowly changed its direction and fell towards this space. The sword catacomb. An existence that had existed for thousands of years. Now that it had disappeared, who knew what kind of unforeseen event it would cause? A few days later, more than 500 miles to the west of the sword catacomb should be where the purple jasmine flower was. Xiaohua had already returned to his original appearance. He was slowly flying in the air with a trace of doubt on his face. As he walked, he waved his hand and a thumb-sized lightning easily struck down. It was precisely the lightning that struck a thick ancient tree in the distance. Strange, Xiaohua whispered to himself. Previously in the sword catacomb, there was no lightning. Now that the sword catacomb is no longer here, why is there no lightning? Could it be that this sword catacomb was originally a little strange? Is it because of this strangeness that the sword catacomb was formed? And it wasn't because of the sword catacomb that it became so strange. Moreover, this young master's lightning-attracting technique still exists. Compared to before the core condensation, there isn't any change. Thinking of this, Xiaohua immersed his divine thought into his dantian, and his hand formed another seal. In his dantian, the two fist-sized golden cores emitted a faint brilliance, and a wave of spiritual power gushed out. No, this golden core seems to be a little different from what martial uncle Zhenqing said. Xiaohua looked at the incomparably smooth silver golden core and shook his head. The golden core is born from the heavenly Tao and is somewhat similar to alchemy. There must be some traces of the heavenly Tao inside. Ayo, I understand. Xiaohua's divine sense easily penetrated the golden core and entered the inner layer of the silver brilliance. In an instant, he saw the true core of the golden core, as well as the lightning core and many planet-like true essence particles. The heavenly Tao starry sky? Xiaohua looked at the constantly rotating sphere and the silver clouds and unconsciously groaned. Others bitterly search for the heavenly Tao starry sky. Even Taoist Yan Hong of the Haoming City is proud of the Xiankong Pavilion's starry sky. However, this young master's golden core actually has this thing. This. Xiaohua smiled bitterly. Now that he knew the disadvantages of mutation, he was really worried about the effects of the heavenly Tao starry sky's golden core when he was pregnant. Forget it. Don't think about it anymore. One wrong step and all wrong steps. All the karma had already been planted when this young master built his foundation. What's the use of thinking about it now? It's better to cultivate more, look for more secret techniques, and make more preparations for the pregnancy. Xiaohua shook his head and smiled. As the saying goes, when the water comes, the earth will cover it. When the soldiers come, the soldiers will block them. This young master wants to see what kind of scenery it will be like when I'm pregnant. After thinking about it, Xiaohua raised his head and looked into the distance. He felt strange and said, "My wife, why isn't she here yet? Could it be that something happened to the sword tomb? This place is only a few hundred miles away from the sword tomb." As he spoke, Xiaohua released his divine sense. Then, a smile appeared on his face again. This girl doesn't miss her husband at all? This kind of dawdling. Doesn't she know the principle that a long separation makes the heart grow fonder? Sure enough, in the time it took to finish a meal, Fairy Hongxia's graceful figure appeared in mid-air in the distance. She released her divine thought, and the moment she saw Xiaohua, she immediately increased her flying speed. Like a phoenix returning to its nest, she rushed over. Chapter 2699. Hubby, looking at Xiaohua's smiling face, Fairy Xia's heart felt warm. It was as if all the complicated feelings and worries she had along the way had turned into smoke. Looking at Xiaohua rushing towards her like a gust of wind, her brows flushed red. Her slightly warm body was like a swallow as she threw herself into Xiaohua's embrace. Tightly holding onto Xiaohua's waist, Fairy Xia used all her strength, as if she wanted to embed Xiaohua into her body. It was only this feeling of strength that gave Fairy Xia a sense of security. Xiaohua naturally felt Fairy Xia's emotions, and his heart was filled with emotions. Indeed, in a sword battle, there was danger at every moment. Any carelessness could lead to the death of a cultivator. To let Fairy Xia fight alone in such a cruel battlefield, it was really difficult for her. Luckily, Xiaohua had encountered two of Fairy Xia's most critical moments. Xiaohua had not concealed his cultivation level for Fairy Xia's sake. Both times, he had revealed his actual cultivation level. "Hubby, love me." Fairy Xia leaned her head against Xiaohua. Her cheeks were as hot as charcoal and her heart was beating like a little deer. Although the two of them had already experienced dual cultivation before, when she suddenly said such words, even though it was just a whisper, it still made her feel very shy in her heart. When Xiaohua heard this, he was slightly taken aback, and immediately became overjoyed. This kind of request is what all men in the world like. It is also something that all men are duty-bound to do. And Xiaohua had already prepared everything for Fairy Xia. Following which, Xiaohua hugged Fairy Xia in his arms. His figure drew a beautiful arc in the air as he flew towards a low concave area. There was a cave entrance hidden under the mountain rocks there. After a few hours, under the mountain rocks, in the cave, Fairy Xia was sweating profusely. Her body was wrapped in a bright red robe, and she was lying on Xiaohua's body. Her arms were like pure white jade, and there was a faint blush in the light jade color. "Hubby." Fairy Xia's hand was holding Xiaohua's. Hearing Xiaohua's deep heart, her eyes were like flowing water, and she murmured softly, as if she had no strength left, and as if she was afraid of disturbing the silence. "You hid it from me so painfully. You actually have such a high cultivation. Hee, I've never hidden anything from you. In this entire world. Only you know what my cultivation level is like." Xiaohua was also extremely carefree. He held Fairy Xia's slender fingers and laughed softly. "Humph, if I hadn't seen your eyes, I wouldn't have believed it." Fairy Xia rebuked. "You actually managed to cultivate my sister's purloin swapping technique to such an exquisite level. Even those golden core masters could not tell. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Xiaohua's eyes turned slightly, and he said with a smile, "Your husband also wants to tell you, but there's always no time. Moreover, if you don't ask, I won't be able to recall such minor details of the secret technique." "Speak." Fairy Xia raised her eyebrows. "Other than your identity as nameless, what other identities do you have? And how many dual cultivation partners?" Xiaohua's heart thumped. The reason why he did not mention to Fairy Xia that he could change his appearance was because he was afraid that Fairy Xia would ask such a question. He seemed to already know that all female cultivators, regardless of their cultivation level, would have such suspicions on this matter. "Listen to what my wife is saying. Your husband had no choice but to change his appearance in order to save my wife." Xiaohua hurriedly explained, "Your husband is so handsome. Changing my appearance would damage my image." That day, my Tao sect disciples gathered at Sky Patrol City. Every one of them was full of fighting spirit. Who knew that at this time, only 100,000 disciples survived? Speaking of this matter, Xiaohua also sighed. "In this battle, my Tao sect suffered a crushing defeat." "Alright, what happened in the Battle of the Sword Tomb? Your husband saw that beside the sword array, there seemed to be another array? The Golden Core Masters of the discussion hall. Why would they think of setting up an array in the sword tomb?" Fairy Xia's face showed that she was in a difficult position and said softly, "I really don't know how the array was set up in the sword tomb. I only found out after chasing the sword cultivators into the sword tomb. As for the details, my husband can ask senior brother Li Zongbao. He should know more." "Alright. When your husband sees Li Zongbao, I will ask him then." Xiaohua nodded. "That senior brother Li mentioned it to me before." Fairy Xianxia chuckled. The three of you have killed Qin Jian and received the #1 bounty of our Dao sect. Your bounty is in his hands. If I see you, I'll ask you to look for him. He'll give you a surprise.
Surprise?
What surprise? Xiaohua was curious. Fairy Xianxia shook her head. I don't know. I'm afraid that the bounty is extremely high. As for what kind of bounty there is because the battle was in a hurry, I only know that there is a huge reward for you. As for what it is, I don't know. What kind of surprise can there be? It's just some cultivation techniques, spirit stones and the like. Xiaohua did not mind. He had many things in his space. Just the things he gave Zhonghauren and the rest would not be any less than the bounty. However, he really could not think of any surprises. I will tell my husband about the battle at the Sword Catacomb. Thinking about the 2 battles at the Sword Catacomb, Fairy Xianxia felt a lingering fear. She could not help but want to tell Xiaohua about it. She wanted him to share the fear in her heart.
All right.
Xiaohua had long known about the uneasiness in Fairy Xia's heart from her abnormal behavior. If this uneasiness were to continue for a long time, it would definitely become an inner demon. Telling him about it now was indeed beneficial. Following which, Fairy Xianxia told Xiaohua about everything that happened at the Sword Catacomb. Although Xiaohua already knew the outcome, but his heart could not help but rise and fall with Fairy Xia's experience. In the end, he even felt a little regretful.
My wife.
Xiaohua hugged Fairy Xianxia tightly, just like how Fairy Xianxia hugged him previously. It's been hard on you. In the future, you will stay by my side. I will be a big tree that can shelter you from the wind and rain. I will block all the difficulties for you. Hee. After Fairy Xianxia finished speaking, she heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. Hearing Xiaohua's caring words, she smiled sweetly and shook her head. Although my husband's words make my heart feel sweet, you cannot do that.
Why?
Xiaohua did not expect Fairy Xianxia to reject him. He was stunned. The path of cultivation is like rowing a boat against the current. If I were to always be under your protection, how would I be able to grow? Even if I have some secret techniques, my husband has some help. But what about the tribulation? Would my husband be able to help me overcome the tribulation? Fairy Xianxia smiled. My husband's kind intentions are appreciated. However, this path, I still have to walk it myself. Only the path I walk is the true path.
Good.
Xiaohua praised. With such ambition, you are truly my wife. If your husband does not praise you, who will? No matter who praises me, it is not as good as my husband praises me. Fairy Xianxia smiled. Back then, my husband's cultivation base was much weaker than mine. Now, TSKSK, you can even pretend to be a nascent soul master. You can make a group of gold core masters bow down and worship you. You can make a group of 3rd-grade illusory swordsmen run away in fear. I will have to catch up to my husband. Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He was just about to ask about the journey to Million Meng Mountains when he saw Fairy Xianxia smiling like a flower, pointing her finger at Xiaohua's nose and saying, "What a pity. My husband has such a powerful divine ability, but in terms of finding the direction, you are still lacking."
Ah,
how did you know? Xiaohua was stunned. This was his only weakness, and he had never told anyone about it. "Teske," Fairy Xianxia smiled. My husband told me that it was 500 miles south of the Sword Catacomb, and this place is already towards the west. If not for me flying towards the west for a few dozen miles, how would I be able to find my husband? It's already towards the west? Xiaohua's expression was very awkward. He scratched his head and said, I remember flying straight towards the south. Chapter 2700.
Hee.
Fairy Xianxia smiled tactfully and did not speak. After a while she asked curiously, Husband, in the sword tomb you should be condensing your core, right? How could there be such a celestial phenomenon? Also, how did you get to the sword tomb?
This.
Xiaohua hesitated slightly. The matters of the Yu family of Fallen Gold Mountain were very complicated. Furthermore, there were many disputes with the Huanhua sect. His appearance as Feng Ying had nothing to do with Fairy Xianxia. However, he had already promised Fairy Xianxia that other than Nameless, he did not have any other clones. Now that there was another Feng Ying, wouldn't he be lying? Furthermore, if Fairy Xianxia knew about the Jade Tong, wouldn't she pay more attention? Then, with the Jade Tong's high cultivation, wouldn't it be easy for something to go wrong? Even if he was not afraid of the Jade Tong, Fairy Xianxia could not help but be afraid. This person had personally sacrificed 100,000 cultivators. Should I say or not? Xiao Hua hesitated because if he did not say anything, Fairy Xianxia would be even more ignorant. Who knows, she might even fall into the Jade Tong's trap. Hee, if husband doesn't want to say then don't say it. Fairy Xianxia did not have a trace of unwillingness. Other than the matter of Mingyue and the rest, Fairy Xianxia was still very assured of Xiao Hua. It's not that I don't want to say it. Actually, rather than knowing some things, it's better not to know. Xiao Hua smiled and said, these things are related to your Huanhua sect. I'm afraid that you will be involved. However, after the Battle of the Sword Tomb, you are a hero of the war. Not to mention that Xiang Ming will take care of you. Even the sect leader of the Rinsing Flower sect will favor you. These miscellaneous matters are nothing. It's actually related to my Huanhua sect? Fairy Xianxia was stunned. However, thinking about the Sword Tomb, she frowned and knew that it was not a small matter. Thus, she did not ask any more questions. Hee, didn't you want to know about the Sword Tomb's celestial phenomenon? With a wave of his hand, Xiao Dou was taken out from the Buddha fire. He smiled and said, it was this item that destroyed the Sword Tomb. Saying that, Xiao Hua briefly explained the abnormality of Xiao Dou. Do you recognize this item? Xiao Hua asked with a smile. Fairy Xianxia took the small dipper. After looking at it, she released her divine sense. In the end, she shook her head and said, I have never heard of this item, nor have I seen any records of this item. However, since this inconspicuous thing could actually destroy the Sword Tomb, that was definitely a treasure with inconceivable power. Husband, you have to keep it well. Even if it's someone else, you can't just casually ask too much. Out of habit, Fairy Xianxia wanted to say, if you can't do it, go ask senior martial brother Li Zongbao. However, on second thought, Li Zongbao realized that if the whereabouts of such a powerful treasure were leaked, even though he would keep it a secret, he could not afford to be careless. If the Utopia faction knew about it and He Ping really wanted it, what could Li Zongbao do? Got it. Xiao Hua smiled as he put Xiao Dou back into the Buddha fire. If I don't have full confidence, I definitely won't ask. Completely confident? Why are you asking others? Fairy Xianxia asked curiously. Xiao Hua shrugged his shoulders and asked, if this husband doesn't ask, how would this husband know the origin of this thing? Husband, where did you get it? Naturally, you can go and look for it. Fairy Xianxia replied. TSK. Xiao Hua imitated Fairy Xia's tone and said, this thing is a piece of trash, I picked it up. As he spoke, Xiao Hua told her the origin of the matter. Can it be like this? Fairy Xianxia was a little dumbfounded. She did not expect Xiao Hua to pick up this item, and this item that he picked up was actually so powerful. Husband, your luck is really TSK. Fairy Xianxia did not know what to say. That is. Xiao Hua raised his head. My luck is the best in the Xiaoyu continent. Ha ha ha. You're so shameless. Fairy Xianxia laughed like a flower. The two of them teased each other for a while. Finally, Xiao Hua asked, my wife, when are we going to Million Mountain Meng? When we return to Sky Patrol City, I'll report to Martial Uncle Mingyu. Fairy Xianxia finally mentioned Mingyu. However, she still stole a glance at Xiao Hua. Seeing that Xiao Hua did not notice, she said, after all, my Huanhua sect has suffered heavy losses. The remaining disciples, Martial Uncle Xiang Ming will not casually send them out. How many disciples are left in your Huanhua sect? What about my Imperial Thunder sect? Xiao Hua thought again. Also, how did Qian Mo die? I really don't know how Martial Uncle Qian Mo died. Fairy Xianxia said apologetically. You can ask Li Zongbao about this. However, My Huanhua sect is left with less than 5,000 disciples. However, your Imperial Thunder sect has 4,000 more disciples than my Huanhua sect because of the physique of the disciples.
I know about this. Ah,
Less than 10,000 disciples? Xiao Hua's heart ached, but he was still surprised. That's right. Only 100,000 disciples survived the square sword formation. The disciples of the Huanhua sect all had thunder and fire properties, so the spirit-swallowing bugs didn't attack them with all their might. They were only killed by the sword practitioners' flying swords. Only by doing so could we save 10,000 disciples. Fairy Xianxia nodded. Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and asked again. The sword cultivators have 300,000 disciples in the sword tomb. They have conquered such a large territory. I'm afraid they have at least 200,000 disciples. In this battle, they have gained too much of an advantage.
sigh, yes.
Fairy Xianxia sighed and then comforted Xiao Hua. But husband, you don't have to worry too much. How can there be no deaths in a battle? The cultivators in the three kingdoms are as numerous as the hairs on a cow. Compared to the sword cultivators, the number of cultivators dying is nothing. When the nascent soul masters come again, there will be hundreds of thousands of disciples gathered in Sky Patrol City. Qu'est-ce? That's hundreds of thousands of lives. Xiao Hua smacked his lips and said, Gone just like that. I'm afraid it's not just hundreds of thousands of lives. Fairy Xianxia said, including the sword cultivators, it's estimated to be 1 million lives. Actually, there are times when I really wonder why there are so few golden core stage elders in my Dao sect and why the cultivations are so weak. If there were a few advanced golden core stage elders who were adept at planning and strategizing, my Dao sect would not have suffered so many casualties.
It's true.
Xiao Hua suddenly realized that the masters in the conference hall were really only in the middle golden core stage. Even he could not defeat them. How could they fight with the sword cultivators? Maybe they just want them to die. Xiao Hua waved his hand and said casually, Forget it, the battle is over, it's useless to think about this. Qian Mo is also dead. I'm sure my Imperial Thunder sect leader Qian Lazy should also be here? Your Huanhua sect leader should also be here.
Who knows?
Fairy Xianxia shook her head. Actually, the sect leader may not be here, but every sect must have a nascent soul cultivator. When will they be here?
I don't know.
Fairy Xianxia said honestly. But we have to go to Million Mountain before the nascent soul masters arrive.
Okay.
Xiao Hua nodded and said, I'll accompany you back to Sky Patrol City. But I won't be entering Sky Patrol City after you report. Speaking of this, Xiao Hua's eyes lit up and he said with a smile, Why do you have to go back to Sky Patrol City? You and I can go to Million Mountain now. Unexpectedly, Fairy Xianxia smiled bitterly and said, I've already thought about it before I came. First, now that my Dao sect has been defeated, I suddenly propose to go to Million Mountain. I'm afraid it's a little suspicious, or even a hint of escape. Second, the sword vault has disappeared, but the space cracks and other dangerous places in it may not disappear. Instead, it will move because of the changes, and the path that we found earlier may not be usable. Besides, the sword vault is no longer a dangerous place. The sword cultivators will definitely place a large number of troops around the sword vault, which will increase the resistance for us to pass through the sword vault. These are nothing. Xiao Hua said proudly. Do you think I'm afraid of these? Don't forget, you're Xiao Hua, not John Doe. Fairy Xianxia smiled and said, And I still want to wait for the sect to settle down before I make my own plans.
Listen to me.
Xiao Hua clenched his hand and said, We'll go to Million Mountain now. If we wait for the nascent soul masters, I may not have time. How can you not have time? Fairy Xianxia asked curiously. You're also one of the lucky survivors of this war. Maybe you're also going to return to the Imperial Thunder sect. There's such a thing? Xiao Hua was somewhat dumbfounded. He had always been calculating how to avoid meeting Daoist Jianghu, but he never thought that he, as a meritorious official in the war, actually didn't have to fight together with a nascent soul master. How could they meet Daoist Jianghu? Didn't I say earlier? The nascent soul masters will bring back hundreds of thousands of disciples. As for us, these hundreds of thousands of disciples, although we are all meritorious subjects, We are also people who have retreated in defeat. It is not suitable for us to fight again. I heard from Martial Aunt Mingyue that the Jindan masters in the conference hall intend to have us all return to the sect. Fairy Xianxia pursed her lips and said, "Of course, we disciples who have some matters to attend to may stay in Sky Patrol City." Xiao Hua would not tell her about Jingyu's matter. He shook his head and said, "I think it's better for us to go first." "All right then." Fairy Xianxia nodded and said, "If that's the case, I'll catch up with Martial Aunt Mingyue and tell them about this matter. I'll follow you to Million Mountain Meng." "Good." Xiao Hua stroked Fairy Hongxia's silky skin and said, "I'll follow you." "Husband, you don't have to show up now." Fairy Hongxia shook her head. "The Imperial Thunder Sect is now without a leader. Although you're only at the middle stage of foundation establishment, your reputation is already out there. If you go back, you may not be able to come out. You'll follow me and contact Senior Martial Brother Li Zongbao to see if there's any surprise for you. Then follow me to the Sword Tomb." "All right, I'll do as you say." Xiao Hua kissed Fairy Hongxia's cheek. The two stood up, tidied their clothes, and flew out of the cave. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.